Chapter 95, Devouring Spirit. Genius Dr. Shi, do you know what kind of poison was in Haoxuan's body? Hush's movements slightly paused and she was silent momentarily before finally saying, the poison found in young Master Ouyang's body was devouring spirit. This poison is extremely rare in Jinling country, it's colorless and tasteless, so it's very difficult to detect this poison in an ordinary martial artist. Once this poison is administered, it nourishes itself on the body's spiritual power, rapidly spreading throughout the entire body. For people infected with this poison, the meridians will rot inch by inch, while the dantian will gradually wither until all that remains of the person is a layer of skin, only then will they stop breathing. During this process, the person will feel like they're slowly being devoured by 1,000 ants, in such unbearable agony that they would wish for death. An ordinary person would absolutely be unable to endure it. When saying these words, Hush's face had slightly blushed. This was because she wasn't able to find out any information about the devouring spirit poison. Rather, the information had come from Nangong Yu, who had taken the bottle of poison with him, and several days later had ordered people to deliver a jade slip detailing the poison to her. Recorded on the jade slip was information regarding the devouring spirit's prescription and toxicity, with even a few detailed cases attached. With such a rare poison, she knew that within such a short period of time that she wouldn't have been able to find out such knowledge. Yet just recalling the shameless words that person had attached at the end of the jade slip caused Hush's heart turn from gratefulness to resentment. That shameless bastard, who would like to think of him while lying awake restless and worried at night. Just dream on. Ouyang Zhixiong's and Ouyang Haoxuan's faces changed after hearing Hush's explanation. Ouyang Zhixiong fiercely attacked a rock nearby, and after just hearing a bang, that rock that was as tall in height as half a person, instantly collapsed into dust. Who would be this vicious as to actually use devouring spirit to deal with my Ouyang family? He not only wanted to destroy Haoxuan, but also wanted to make our Ouyang family sink into a situation devoid of hope. Ouyang Haoxuan slightly moved his mouth as he sneeringly said, no matter who is it, since they dared to plot against Ouyang Haoxuan, then there will be a day where I must make them repay what they owe 1,000 times. Hushi wasn't interested in participating in the Ouyang family's revenge, and since the illness was already cured, she was naturally ready to leave. However, just when she was about to go, she heard Ouyang Haoxuan gently call out to her, Genius Dr. Shi, please stay a moment. Hushi turned around and saw the man who had been reclining on the rattan chair slowly stand up, his slender body appearing thin and weak under the sunshine, yet his back was quite straight. Genius Dr. Shi, can I call you Shi-Yu? The man's low and quiet voice was slightly hoarse, causing Hushi to raise her eyebrows yet not answer. Ouyang Haoxuan also didn't intend for her to respond, his mouth lifting into a shallow smile as he said, maybe Shi-Yu didn't take me seriously, but I still want to say it to you again. Young master, you have graced me with a new lease on life, so I, Ouyang Haoxuan, hereby vow, that in the future if Shi-Yu has any requests of me, as long as it doesn't bring disaster to my Ouyang family, I will certainly to go through any difficulty to accomplish it for you. If I violate this oath, let me be struck with divine punishment. Hushi stared blankly, while Ouyang Zhixiong was shocked, but immediately thinking of his son, who just half a month ago was dispirited and desperate, he felt relief. It wasn't an exaggeration to repay this life-saving kindness by willing to risk life and limb. Hushi was surprised by Ouyang Haoxuan's eyes, they were too bright, too cold. They somewhat resembled an aurora blooming between glacier, obviously dazzling to look at, yet without a trace of emotion. Subsequently, Hushi felt a smile burst across her face, and without hesitation, she turned around and left Ouyang Manor. No matter what promises or oaths she heard, for her, it was all meaningless. After all, the partner who had previously accompanied her for 10 years had easily betrayed her, isn't that so? Chapter 96. Close relationship. Hushi hadn't left Ouyang Manor for long when a carriage suddenly came from behind, rushing to catch up, before finally stopping in her path. A familiar snow-white horse stood in front of her, kicking its front hoof as it snorted arrogantly with its nose. The corner of Hushi's mouth flattened and sure enough, soon the carriage's curtain lifted, revealing Nangong Yu's face which could turn all living things upside down. The distance from Yangjing City to the remote suburbs is quite far, it would be better to let me send you Shi-Er. Hushi didn't hesitate in refusing, We're not going in the same direction, it's too troublesome. Nangongyu slightly smiled as he leisurely spoke. Who's not going in the same direction? This king just happens to be going to Kang Mountain to attend to some business. If you're not going to get in, then this king will just have to force you like last time. Hashi felt the veins in her forehead pop, and eventually unable to resist a certain shameless man, she jumped onto the carriage with a cold face. Before getting on though, she couldn't help but glance towards the man driving the carriage. Rather than seeing Qing Long, a refined-looking gentleman wearing moon-white brocade robes was sitting in the driver's seat. Compared to Qing Long, this man's facial features were far more outstanding, with sparkling eyes and a vivid and lively face. He and Qing Long were like polar opposites. Noticing Hashi studying him, the man quickly hid his shock and displayed a carefree smile, saying, "Hello, I'm one of Master's personal servants, Bai Hu." Hashi nodded to him without speaking, instead hopping straight into the carriage. Bai Hu's smile vanished as he murmured with astonishment, "My God, Master's sweetheart is actually a man. A delicate youth on top of that. This news is really too much." Bai Hu's heart longed to gossip about this news while he quickly drove the carriage forward, soon leaving behind Yangjing City and arriving outside Hashi's shabby courtyard. After entering the carriage, Hashi had decided not to provoke Nangongyu, but unexpectedly, throughout the entire journey Nangongyu hadn't spoken to her once. It was as if she didn't exist to him as he leaned on the soft cushions, leisurely flipping through a dilapidated ancient book. While on the contrary, Hashi's heart was puzzled as she secretly glanced at him several times on the journey. Yet the entire time, up until the carriage stopped in front of her courtyard, Nangongyu had completely ignored her, making her feel in a somewhat bad mood. Lightly jumping off the carriage, Hashi was just about to walk into the courtyard when she turned her head and saw Nangongyu, wearing a light reddish-purple robe, exiting the carriage too. With his hands behind his back, he slowly walked over to her, his solemn attitude clearly indicating that he wanted to follow her in entering the house. Hashi's eyebrows raised. "We've arrived at my courtyard and you've sent me home, so why are you following me?" Nangongyu laughed, his voice clear and pleasant to listen to. With our relationship, how can this king pass your house without entering?" Hashi gnashed her teeth, fiercely saying, "What relationship do I have with you?" Nangongyu's figure suddenly flashed as he leaned closer to her, murmuring in her ear, "Don't you know? The kind with skin touching skin, a close physical relationship where partners are deeply attached to each other, that kind of relationship." Are you still unable to remember?" Seeing Hashi starting to get angry, he slowly made something up on the spot, not to mention, "I've been working hard in order to lift the seal on Xi'er's dantian. Don't tell me I can't get compensation in advance." Heard the words about unsealing her dantian, Hashi's expression suddenly froze as she no longer had the confidence to retort. Chapter 97, Spiritual Kitchen Expert. Unsealing her dantian to enhance her strength was her top priority at the moment. Unfortunately, it just so happens that besides Nangongyu, there was no other person she could think of to help her. Heard the commotion outside, wet nurse Chen rushed to greet her young miss, yet was shocked upon seeing Nangongyu sticking very closely to Hashi. A strong and noble aura could be felt from Nangongyu's body, while his face was so handsome that it could stun and dazzle a woman. It was simply too oppressive. "Young master, you've returned?" Wet nurse Chen cautiously watched Nangongyu, still struggling to catch her breath as she asked, "And this person is?" Hashi glanced at Nangongyu and saw his indifferent expression. With his ice-cold eyes, it was like he was an immortal, looking at ordinary people as if they were ants. His aura was one that was so imposing that it deterred people from coming close, and compared to his appearance when he was in front of her, it was like there was two different people. When Nangongyu was like this, it more resembled the legendary king of hell who was known to be cold-hearted, cruel, and capable of killing without remorse, right? This is, young Master Yu, and his subordinate, Bai Hu. Hush's face was taut as she introduced them, reluctantly adding, "My circumstances nowadays is thanks to their help." Wet nurse Chen uttered a shocked exclamation, and suddenly her expression as she looked at Nangongyu and Bai Hu was full of gratefulness and admiration. Hashi had purposely spoken vaguely, letting wet nurse Chan mistakenly believe that Hashi was able to escape from Gluttonous House, and to now also be able to have such strong skills, due to Nangongyu. This was her Mrs. Savior. Suddenly, her instinctual fear of Nangong Yu was forgotten as she politely invited the two guests to enter the house. Even Hashi was thrown to the back of her mind. Young Master Yu, since you've come all this way to this small and remote courtyard, then it would be better if you could stay and have a meal. We don't have much, but I can assure you that we have the most delicious spiritual foods in the entire Jinling city here. Young Master Yu, you must taste it. Following behind Nangong Yu, Bai Hu finally couldn't help but laugh. The most delicious spiritual food, hehe, which type of most delicious food in this Jinling city hasn't my master yet tasted? Wet nurse, isn't your boast a little too big? Especially looking around at this small shabby courtyard where there is no spiritual power fluctuations. This courtyard also didn't have a protection spell. How could they have enough crystal stones to build an expensive spiritual kitchen? When Wet Nurse Chen heard this, she didn't feel the slightest bit humiliated or angry. Instead, she proudly turned her head to look at Hush's cold face, then mysteriously said, "Young Master Yu and Young Master Bai Hu wouldn't know, but our family's young master is a spiritual kitchen expert. I even dare to say that the delicious food she can make can't be matched by the top chef from the intoxicated Immortal restaurant." Bai Hu's face still showed ridicule as he didn't believe her in the slightest. However, Nangong Yu raised his brows in interest, and with a smirk, he looked over at Hushi. Why didn't this king know that she also had this kind of skill? Hushi's expression didn't change as she lightly said, "Wet Nurse Chen only selfishly said nonsense, don't believe it." "How can it be nonsense?" Wet Nurse Chen said anxiously, young master, anyone in this courtyard who's eaten your cooking has highly praised it. If this old slave has lied, then let heaven's thunder strike me. If you say it like that, then I must definitely taste it," said Nangong Yu as he lightly smiled. In Hushi's heart she really wanted to be able to seal Wet Nurse Chen's mouth, but without the chance she could only gnash her teeth and say, "We don't have enough fresh ingredients in this courtyard, let's try it another day." This wasn't a lie, because although the courtyard stored many foods, most of it was low-rank spiritual beast meat used to prepare food for Shi Jiao and the others. Shi Jiao and the others' bodies were way down on the cultivation line, so their food didn't require much spiritual energy at all, but if Nangong Yu were to consume this low-rank spiritual beast's meat, the effect would be the opposite of the desired result. Chapter 98. Freeloader Nangong Yu only said 2 words, "Bai Hu." Bai Hu immediately revealed a pained face. He absolutely didn't believe that this cute little boy could cook delicious food, but since Master had given him an order, he had no other choice but to carry it out. Half an hour later, Hashi looked at the kitchen piled full of a large quantity of high-quality foods, including fresh and rich spiritual beast meat filled with spiritual energy. She simply didn't know what to say. But when she saw Bai Hu's doubtful eyes and Nangong Yu's meaningful sneer, her heart suddenly surged with haughtiness. Humph, this group of stupid people, daring to doubt her top-level cooking, just wait until later when you'll want to swallow your tongues to savor every bite. Hashi quickly collected the spiritual beast meat into her space, leaving only a fragrant mountain pig and some condiment ingredients on the bench. Next, she removed a simple barbecue grill and seasoning from her space, placing it all in the center of the yard. "What is this strange thing?" Bai Hu muttered, "Isn't cooking supposed to be done in the kitchen with a condensed spiritual power flame? In the end, are you able or cook or not?" Hashi ignored him, her hand that held a handle starting to move, slowing spinning the fragrant mountain pig until the motion was extremely fast. The fragrant mountain pig's body size was small and easy to capture, its meat was tender and delicious, so coupled with its rich spiritual energy, a martial artist would naturally prefer this as a food ingredient. The only disadvantage was that fragrant mountain pigs had a strong fishy smell that was extremely difficult to remove. Of course, a high-level chef would be able to get rid the smell, but using that kind of method would make the spiritual energy in the food almost entirely disappear. That Bai Hu choose this kind of ingredient was to obviously make it difficult for Hashi so that he could see her humiliated. At this moment, they could only see her using water to rinse the pig meat without adding any special herb ingredients to get rid of the smell, causing a sneering expression to subconsciously appear on their faces. However, in the next moment, the contempt in Bai Hu's eyes changed into astonishment. He didn't know when, but more than a dozen silver needles had appeared in Hush's hand. Her actions were extremely quick as she inserted the needles into the pig meat. The meat that was originally still overflowing with spiritual energy was now covered by something similar to an invisible barrier, firmly locking all the spiritual energy inside of it. Heavens, this is possible. Hashi didn't pay any attention to Baihu's exclamation. Instead, her hands started moving faster, and after ensuring that the spiritual energy in the spiritual beast meat wouldn't be lost, she began to empty the fragrant mountain pig's abdominal cavity. Next, she quickly filled the inside with all kinds of herbs and fruits, using snow ginseng to get rid of the smell and increase the flavor. Following that, she then got Xiao Li to come help her, smearing it layer by layer with all kinds of seasonings that were just mixed a few days ago. Baihu watched on with a stunned expression. He had never seen someone cooking fragrant mountain pig with such a method before. As Hashi's slender and elegant fingers moved, it was very natural. Comparable to moving clouds and flowing water, it was extremely pleasing to the eyes to watch and helping to greatly increase a person's appetite. It was enthralling, yet Hashi suddenly lifted her head and beckoned towards him. "Burn the charcoal in the grill." "You're ordering me to burn the charcoal?" Baihu exclaimed, "But I'm Master's personal bodyguard, the majestic Hell King manners. You can't even light the charcoal?" Hashi looked at him with contempt, then looked at Nangongyu. "All your people in Hell King's manor are freeloaders?" Baihu suddenly burst into tears. In his heart he shouted, "How can I be a freeloader? I'm the one who bought this fragrant mountain pig. I bought it. I bought it." But when he made contact with his master's deep eyes, Baihu became terrified and obediently threw a fireball into the grill to light the charcoal. It just so happened that he was a martial artist with a double attribute that included golden fire. Soon, the charcoal started heating up, and once it had reached a sufficient temperature, Hashi placed the pig meat on the grill and began to slowly turn it. Chapter 99, ravenously devouring with the charcoal being heated by the fire, the fragrant mountain pig began to roast and be coated with a layer of crisp golden skin, with the smell beginning to permeate throughout the yard. Baihu, in accordance with Hashi's requirement, was standing on the side to moderate the temperature of the charcoal, swallowing from time to time as he stared without blinking. Suddenly, his stomach issued a loud gurgling sound, making Xiao Li, who was standing nearby, chuckle when she heard it. This in turn made Baihu's face instantly redden. "This is too shameful. Yet, what smell is this? How can it be so fragrant, causing a person to be so tempted to taste it?" Baihu couldn't help but secretly glance at his master. His master was completely focused on the busy youth tending the grill, his eyes shining brilliantly, as if he was looking at a potential treasure. Taking advantage of the time it took to roast the fragrant mountain pig, Hashi quickly made a salad and some soup. The ingredients and methods used for making both were simple. The ingredients were grown in the ancient rhyme spiritual field, helped to grow with water from the 9th secluded spiritual spring, and after adding seasoning, the food would be delicious and rich with spiritual energy. It completely couldn't be compared with ordinary spiritual food. When Xiao Li passed Baihu as she walked over carrying 2 bowls of the prepared dishes, a tantalizing fragrance assaulted his nostrils, the roast meat so fragrant it caused Baihu to gulp and feel agitated. "Hey, you can eat now." Nangongyu returned to his senses when he heard Hashi call out, and looking up, he caught sight of a white robe and an elegant girl's face filled with a light smile. With picturesque features, her eyes shined like stars. On the table, tendrils of fragrance curled around the simple food, while the girl's originally somewhat glacial features had now become soft and warm. This was just like a warm family. Nangongyu stepped forward, and sitting down at the table, he picked up the chopsticks in front of him to taste the food. The taste of the fragrant and tender pig meat lightly spread across his tongue, and with the fresh and rich spiritual energy accompanied by a slightly spicy flavor, it instantly stimulated the sensitivity of his taste buds. It was as if there was a gentle trickle of energy slowly being absorbed into his body, causing the fatigue in his body and spirit to gradually be swept away. Hashi sat on the other side of the table with a hand under her chin. She was beaming as she looked at him. "How's the taste?" Nangongyu lightly replied, "Not bad." "Humph, not bad. You say that, but your hand is moving so fast to eat. Isn't this like you're ravenously devouring the food?" "Wait a minute, you're actually going to directly use your hands to grab the roast meat? Aren't you His Highness Hell King? The idol of every girl throughout all of Jinling, and yet you're eating so vigorously like this? What about your image? In the time it takes to burn a short stick of incense, the 3 dishes and serving of soup on the table were all eaten clean by Nangong Yu. Baihu sullenly scowled. Master, I helped to roast the food for so long and yet you couldn't even leave a little bit for me. Even such a person like Master had kept eating, forgetting about everyone else. In the end, how delicious had those dishes been? He also would have liked to try tasting it. Woo-woo. Xiao Li saw him looking so pitiful, and only then did she carry out prepared food for Shi Jiao and the others from the kitchen to give to him instead. Of course, this food couldn't be compared in terms of taste and spiritual energy to the food that Nangong Yu had eaten. It wasn't until the sun had started setting in the west that Nangong Yu decided to take his leave. Hashi sent them to the door and was about to return when Nangong Yu suddenly tugged on her wrist, causing her petite body to be tightly enveloped in his embrace. Bastard, you, let go. Wet Nurse Chen and Xiao Li were still watching them from behind. Nangong Yu leaned closer to her ear and whispered, tomorrow I want to eat bergamot gold rolls you were mentioned earlier, so remember to prepare it. Hashi glared at him. What reason would I have to do that? This guy is insatiable. Chapter 100. People from Nalan Manor. Nangong Yu looked down at her with a gentle and warm smile. Also, the snacks that your little servant had spoken, I want to try every type of them. That's all for now. Finished speaking, and without waiting for Hashi to answer him, he turned around and entered the carriage. Hashi was alone as she stood by the courtyard gate, angrily gritting her teeth. That's all for now. Who does this bastard think he is? What made Hashi depressed was that one word from the Hell King really carried an enormous weight, completely preventing people from going against it. From that day forward, every few days, Nangong Yu would come to her small courtyard to be a freeloader. He claimed it was an advanced reward for his services. Even if he himself didn't have the free time to come, he would order Baihu to come collect the packed food. This caused Baihu, the gossiper with a big lively stomach, to become familiar with the people in this courtyard. Since eating Hashi's finely made dishes, Baihu had admired Hashi. Previously he had despised her, but now he flattered her to curry favor with her. Things continued like this for more than half a month, until one day, news from Nangong Yu stopped arriving. Even Baihu's visits started decreasing. When she asked Baihu about Nangong Yu's whereabouts, all she got in return were vague responses. His eyes showed his alertness and suspicion, that he was excluding her, making Hashi feel bad. Today when Baihu came to collect the food, he noticed that both Hashi and Xiao Li refused to acknowledge him, so he moved closer to them in embarrassment. Young Master Shi, these days Master is really busy, so he's unable to come over. In the midst of his busy schedule though, he still found time to order me to look after you, young Master Shi. Hashi uttered an indifferent, oh. It was neither angry or happy. In fact, it was as if they were only talking about an insignificant person. When Baihu remembered that his master really valued this youngster, his heart couldn't help but tighten, while cold sweat dripped down his back. This is all Qing Long and Zhu Qiu's fault. Those two guys would repeatedly caution Baihu to be wary of unknown people scheming against Master. Coupled with the fact that Master was now in his most critical time, it had made Baihu's attitude towards this young Master Shi Yu somewhat cold. The result was that when he went to deliver the food to Master that day, Master's expression had unexpectedly sunk. Obviously when he looked at the spiritual food it was exactly the same. Smell, look, and taste were all great, while the spiritual energy was also rich, yet in the end, just how could Master tell that the taste was different? He was even able to feel that young Master Shi Yu was unhappy just by the taste of the food. Since then, despite how much slandering Qing Long and Zhu Qiu would do, Baihu no longer dared to ignore this young Master Shi Yu even a little bit. He has never seen Master so attached to a person before, regardless of whether that person was a man or a woman. So, as long as he is Master's sweetheart, he, Baihu, swore to protect him. Not to mention, young Master Shi Yu's foods were so delicious, that if he offended him, wouldn't that mean no more food for him in the future? Baihu was lost in his thoughts when suddenly, he noticed Wet Nurse Chen hurriedly running over. Instead of her usual kind expression, her face showed panic as she called out, Miss, People from Naylan Manor have come. Wet Nurse Chen's heart was very panicked, as the terror caused by Naylan Manor had left a deep-rooted scar. Even now, though her miss has become stronger, she was still unable to control her fear of Naylan Manor. So being that she was in such a hurry, she didn't pay attention to Bai Hu and shouted out Hushi's usual address. Bai Hu opened his eyes wide in surprise as he looked at Hushi. Although he had long suspected, especially after Zhu Qiu's implied words, that young Master Shi Yu is a girl, but how could there be such a magical technique to change one's appearance in this world? Chapter 101. Damaging Naylan Manor's reputation. His cultivation base is so high, yet he unexpectedly couldn't tell at all that this person is a woman disguised as a man. Hashi didn't panic, because for her, Bai Hu knowing her true gender was simply an insignificant matter. However, just thinking about Naylan Manor, and also Naylan Feisue, who caused the death of Naylan Hashi, the corner of her mouth raised slightly, revealing a cold expression. Her hand gently moved, like the flutter of a thin cicada wing, and suddenly a human skin mask appeared in her hand. After lightly wiping her face, she then applied the mask. In the next moment, her youthful delicate skin, with an elegant and beautiful appearance, had now transformed into that of an ugly girl. Her complexion was now malnourished and sickly, with her skin dried up and swollen around her eyes. Bai Hu looked stunned as he pointed at Hushi's face, speechless for half a day. At this moment, a rough and fierce roar burst forth from the door. "Get off! Don't you know who I am? How dare you block me? You all must be really impatient to die." The backyard's gate was savagely pushed open, and an unusually tall and sturdy man dressed in blue walked in with large strides. From his appearance, he looked to be around 40 years old. With a fierce-looking face and the tip of his eyes slightly squinting, he emitted a ruthless aura. This man's name is Qin Lu. He's a slave from Naylan Manor and was one of Zhong Dezhong's men. Due to the disappearance of Zhong Dezhong some time ago, Qin Lu had filled the gap of his absence and was promoted to head butler. He was currently very proud of his success. However, once Bai Hu saw him, his face revealed nothing but disdain. This man was merely trash on the third rank of the qi refining stage. If he were to be assigned a place in Hell King Manor, he wouldn't even be able to find work sweeping the floor at the most remote courtyard. Wet Nurse Chen was terrified, yet still quickly walked forwards and blocked him, saying, "Butler Qin, we are honored by your presence, but whatever is the matter? It's better to tell this old slave. This old slave will then pass it on to Miss. Get out of the way, damned old woman." Qin Lu raised his foot and kicked Wet Nurse Chen, then said with disdain, "Who do you think you are? What sort of qualifications do you have to speak to me? Quickly call Naylan Hashi out here. I came here with orders from Madam." Finished speaking, he no longer looked at Wet Nurse Chen and taking big strides, he walked into the backyard. Yet just as he entered the backyard, Qin Lu's footsteps halted, his face showing a surprised expression. Not only was Hashi sitting in the yard, casually drinking tea from a cup she held, but standing beside her there was a little girl who was arranging refreshments for her, while several tall and strong men were guarding her. Close by her side, there stood a graceful and outstanding man who was unfamiliar to Qin Lu, yet he had a sinister-looking smile upon his face as he looked at him. Qin Lu couldn't believe his eyes. Is she really that third Miss, Naylan Hashi, who would only keep her head down while shrinking her shoulders and crying? He looked carefully at her again. If it's not third Miss, then who else could it be? Who else had that same pale complexion, with the same ordinary physical body without spiritual power? Humph, she's only trash. Did she think she could threaten me just by gathering some ordinary people to fill this yard? She's dreaming. Thinking till here, Qin Lu's anger increased, so walking forwards in large strides he arrogantly faced Naylan Hashi and sneered, "Third Miss really has great style. I haven't seen you in a few months, yet from where did Third Miss manage to hook these wild men? Clearly you aren't afraid that your reputation as a fickle woman would spread to the public, damaging Naylan Manor's good reputation." Chapter 102. Properly teach you a lesson. Hashi hadn't yet responded when Bai Hu suddenly burst into laughter. "Naylan Manor's good reputation? I'm really sorry, but how come I didn't know about Naylan Manor's good reputation? Didn't the second Miss from your Naylan Manor, Naylan Feisue, seduce young Master Zhu Zhongba from the Zhu family?" The news that she stripped him using violent means has already spread everywhere. Still using her strength against him, even though you can tell with one look that Zhu Zhongba is trash, TSK, the people from Naylan Manor are really well educated. Once Qin Lu heard Baihu's words, his face turned red. With his eyes expressing how humiliated and angry he was, his body slightly trembled with his rage. Even Hashi wore a surprised expression on her face. Oh! It was unexpected that the rumor had spread to such a wild degree that it has already reached Yangjing City. This news really pleased her because if it wasn't thanks to Baihu, she never would have heard such amusing news as she had been busy lately with sorting out her space, and helping Shi Jiao and the others with their training. Thinking of this, she raised her head and glanced at Baihu with appreciation. Baihu straightened his posture, immediately beaming with joy. Aya, young Master Shi Yu, wrong, it should be Miss Naylan. She's finally not angry anymore, there'll be no problem with the food in the future now. Qin Lu finally recovered his wits and wanted to rush over to give Baihu a lesson right away. However, the atmosphere focused around Baihu couldn't help but cause him to shudder. Although Baihu had restrained the power in his cultivation base, due to his rank, it was impossible for it not to make an impact, resulting in Qin Lu instinctively feeling fear. He was used to being the one who took unfair advantage of a situation to bully others, so in the face of Baihu's aura, he had no courage, immediately choosing to rush towards Hashi instead. Little slut, isn't it you who incited your pretty boy to slander our second miss and Naylan Manor? Naylan Manor raised you for so many years, yet you're a slut who kicks their benefactor. Not only do you not know how to be grateful, you even let your lover slander Naylan Manor. On behalf of Madam and second miss, I will now give you a proper lesson. Previously, when Qin Lu had followed Zhong Dezhong to this courtyard to deliver food, he had also used the opportunity to torture this third miss. Because although Naylan Hashi had the noble title as the third miss of the Naylan family, her nature was one of an incompetent coward, and when facing a beating and getting scolded, she could only weep. Whenever he thought of himself beating the third miss, seeing her shivering pitiful body, his tyrannical heart would become excited. Therefore, when he thought he would get to beat her again, with this third miss curled at his feet and begging for mercy, his face flushed while his body trembled due to excitement. Baihu noticed the evil glint in Qin Lu's eyes, which made his own eyes turn cold. She is the person Master cares about and cherishes, yet unexpectedly this guy dares to be so arrogant and humiliate her. He should just die 1,000 times. However, before Baihu could make a move, Zhong San, who had been standing on the side, suddenly rushed forward. With his hands as fast as lightning, he pressed down on Qin Lu's shoulder, buckling it as he forcefully poured in his spiritual power. Qin Lu felt a sharp pain in his meridians, making him unable to move even a single step. Then, Zhong San lifted his foot, ruthlessly kicking Qin Lu's knee. With a heavy-sounding thump, Qin Lu was forced to kneel on the ground, while his head was also pushed down, resulting in him kowtowing to Hashi. A piercing pain came from his knee, and following that pain, his meridians being invaded by spiritual power caused him to release a pained howl. Hashi, who was still sitting beside a stone table, was acting like she didn't hear or see any of it. Leisurely, she reached across, and grabbing a piece of sugar-steamed cheese that Xiao Li had prepared, she gracefully placed it into her mouth. Chapter 103. I'll let you die ugly. This sugar-steamed cheese made use of the spiritual fruit and spiritual flowers from her space. Specially mixed with water from the 9th secluded spirit spring, its flavor was fresher and more delicate compared to the famous desserts from her previous world. Most important of all, was that it also helped in nursing the spiritual energy to circulate in the body, and stabilizing the endurance of the meridians. Recently this has become the favorite dessert of Xiao Li and Hashi. Baihu watched helplessly on the side as Hashi and Xiao Li were eating. As the fragrance of the food reached his nose and distracted him, his stomach began to rumble. Finally, Xiao Li couldn't stand his pitiful expression any longer, and after obtaining permission from Hashi, she then carried a few desserts over to him while beaming. At this time, Qin Lu, who had been howling due to the sharp pain he felt, slowly came to his senses. Struggling with all his might, he twisted around to see who the person was that had pressed him into the ground. His face was distorted from his anger, but suddenly, shock was visible in every feature instead. Zhong San. Unexpectedly, it was Zhongshan. However, his cultivation base was only at rank 2 of the Qi refining stage. How could he beat him? With a sneak attack, right? This must be because he was momentarily unguarded, so Zhongshan used that opportunity to smoothly attack him, that's all. Thinking till here, Qin Lu shouted loudly in anger, "Zhongshan, you dog, don't you know who I am? I'm currently the external manager for Naylan Manor. Did you dare touch me because you've eaten leopard guts? Release me immediately, did you hear me? Otherwise I will make it so that you die in an extremely ugly way." Qin Lu's duty as an external manager is to manage this outside courtyard, so it can be said that every slave belonging to Naylan Manor staying in this courtyard, including Zhongshan and the others, were all his subordinates. It was up to him how he wished to handle them, therefore he was furious. Zhongshan's eyes showed a carefree smile, and with a deep voice he said, "Qin Lu, who do you think you are? I now only recognize young miss as my master." The moment that Zhongshan became controlled by Hashi, his state of mind was completely lost. At first, he had been filled with despair at the thought of spending his lifetime as an ignorant and unfeeling puppet. However, with the passage of time, his consciousness had become clearer, and apart from not being able to go against Hush's commands or hurting her, himself and the others were gradually no different from ordinary people. Furthermore, once they drank Mrs. Special herbal drink, Zhongshan and the others were pleasantly surprised as their cultivation bases started to rise after being stagnant for a long time. Zhongshan, who had had the highest cultivation base amongst them, finally managed to break through to rank 3 of the Qi refining stage. Afterwards, Zhongshan and the others were fiercely dedicated to serving Hashi as their master. Not just an insignificant manager from Naylan Manor, but even if the madam from Naylan Manor personally came, they were only willing to obey Mrs. commands. After hearing Zhongshan speak, Qin Lu just stared blankly. Then, due to his anger, he started trembling all over. His spiritual power even began to sharply increase. No matter how much he thought about it, he just couldn't understand. Zhongshan is a slave from Naylan Manor, and previously he was respectful towards him. How can he now be such a traitor, acting like a dog that kneeled and licked that useless third miss? So the next moment, the spiritual power in Qin Lu's body suddenly burst forth, and fiercely shaking off Zhongshan's suppression, he sent him flying with a kick. Although Zhongshan had broken through to rank 3 of the Qi refining stage, he still couldn't compare with Qin Lu, who had already been on rank 3 of the Qi refining stage for many years, resulting in his strength only being able to last for a short length of time. After kicking Zhongshan away, without the slightest hesitation, Qin Lu rushed towards Hashi. He wanted to tear her to pieces, his eyes red with rage. Hashi stopped Bai Hu and Shi Jiao, as well as the others, as they all moved to take action. Withdrawing the bone whip from the storage ring on her finger, she lightly waved her wrist, casually sending the whip in the direction of Qin Lu as he rushed closer towards her. It was like the white whip had eyes as it flew like a spirit snake straight towards Qin Lu's body. Obviously it looked like not much strength had been used and would be weak, yet when the whip thrashed Qin Lu's body, its strength abruptly increased. Qin Lu issued continuous shrill screams as once again he fell into a kneeling position on the ground with a thump. Chapter 104, Vicious Woman Who Treats the Concubine's Daughter Severely. The whip landed accurately on Qin Lu's body like rain, and no matter how much he used his spiritual power to dodge, he was unable to avoid the whip that made him feel like his flesh was being torn. This kind of torture continued for half an incense stick length of time before it ended, and by now, Qin Lu was lying in severe pain on the ground, tears and mucus running down his face. Bai Hu looked at Hashi playing with the whip as it flashed through the air like a dance, and his admiration towards her increased. Obviously she is an ordinary person who lacked a cultivation base, yet by just relying on a bone whip, she was able to beat up a martial artist on the Qi refining stage until he was scared witless. Young Miss Naylan, your method of disciplining slaves is extremely brilliant. Hashi raised her head and noticed Bai Hu's fawning smile, so she faintly said, "Then how about I teach this method to your master too?" Bai Hu's expression abruptly froze, and quickly lowering his head, he no longer dared to speak. If this method was taught to master, then who would be the people he would discipline? Wouldn't it be them, his subordinates? Miss Naylan was really too sinister. At this moment, Qin Lu gradually returned to his senses, and stubbornly supporting his sore body, he slowly got up from the ground, fiercely saying, "Third miss, for what reason do you beat me? I was personally appointed by Madam to manage the external manners affairs, and Madam ordered me to come here to find you. You've so arrogantly humiliated me. Do you want to disgrace Madam's face by stepping on her with your foot?" Hashi sneered, her face not showing the least bit of fear like Qin Lu had anticipated. Instead, there was only coldness and contempt. "Who do you think you are to be able to stand on behalf of Madam's face?" Seeing the displeasure revealed in Qin Lu's expression, the contempt in Hush's eyes increased. "I'll tell you now, you're merely just a dog from Nayland Manor, and I, even if not favored, is still Nayland Manor's third miss. You, as a dog, has dared to run in front of your owner to bark. I'm simply teaching you what is right and proper, so even if you were to complain in front of Madam, what do you think what she can do for you? Hee hee. Wouldn't it be better if I ordered people to make this matter public? I can tell them that the Madam of Nayland Manor incited butler Qin Lu to come to my courtyard to behave atrociously, even threatening to beat me up. We'll see at that time if the people of Yangjing City feel that I am arrogant, or comment that the kind and virtuous Madam Nayland is in fact actually a black-hearted and vicious wife who treats the concubine's daughter severely." Bai Hu, standing on the side, excitedly volunteered himself. "I'm an expert in spreading gossip for this kind of matter. Miss Nayland, you just give this matter to me to handle. I promise that in less than half a day, Madam Nayland's new reputation will be known by everyone. Even the people in Imperial City won't be left out." Hashi almost choked on the tea she was drinking when she heard what was said. She really hadn't expected that the Hell King's personal bodyguard would have a hobby of gossiping like a meddling old woman, whereas for Qin Lu, once he heard these words his complexion became extremely ugly, his heart filling with panic. Madam Nayland maintained a noble and benevolent appearance in Yangjing City. If her reputation was ruined because of him, he didn't dare imagine the consequences. Moreover, this time the Madam had purposely ordered him to ask Third Miss to return. This Third Miss currently still had value as a commodity, so Madam would absolutely not dispose of her yet. Ultimately, the only one with bad luck is him. Thinking of this, Qin Lu felt cold sweat drip down his forehead, his eyes flashed, and finally he lowered his head, unwillingly saying, "Third Miss, please don't talk nonsense. Madam is most fair and benevolent when handling affairs. She absolutely wouldn't treat a concubine's daughter severely. Just a moment ago, I was the one who was too rude and impetuous, offending Third Miss. I ask Third Miss to please forgive me." Chapter 105, Return to Nayland Manor. After saying all this he straightened back up again, and with an aloof manner said, "I came today to present to you Madam's order. Madam said that during childhood Third Miss made a mistake, so she assigned you to live in this remote courtyard as a punishment. Now that you've lived in this courtyard for many years already, it can be considered that you've learned your lesson. Therefore, Madam and Master have kindly sent me to come take Third Miss back to Nayland Manor." Qin Lu finished speaking, his face proud as he waited for Hashi to shed tears of gratitude and kneel as she thanked him. One must know that returning to Nayland Manor, or remaining in this courtyard, the treatment she would receive is like heaven and earth. Nayland Hashi was abandoned from an early age and lived a life worse than the servants. Now that she was finally able to return, she would definitely be insane if she wasn't happy. Wet Nurse Chen, who was standing nearby, gently exclaimed in joy, her eyes tearful as she murmured, Miss, did you hear that? Master is finally taking you back. Master is finally acknowledging you." The expression in Qin Lu's eyes became more arrogant, it faintly carried contempt over her misfortune. Nayland Hashi and this old woman didn't know, but how could she live comfortably after returning to Nayland Manor? It would be like dying without a burial place instead. At that time, his suffering and humiliation from today could be repaid. Qin Lu grew excited as he thought of this, but after waiting for a long time, the anticipated gratitude didn't come. As he raised his lowered head, he came into contact with the sarcastic expression in Hush's eyes. Obviously that was the same thin and shallow face as a moment ago, yet unknown when, those eyes had become as sharp as a cold blade, radiating a chill capable of absorbing a person's soul. Qin Lu's whole body felt like ice as he shuddered, and before he had a chance to speak, Hashi had already started to unhurriedly talk. "Oh, receive me back at Nayland Manor? This is Madame Nayland's order, right? Yes, that's how it is, so? Qin Lu's heart felt frozen as he was watched by those sharp eyes, causing him to stutter. Madam has kindly graced you a favor, you should just obediently accept it. Not too early, not too late, yet it's only now that she shows her kindness. Does she regard Hashi, as a 3-year-old child? Hashi laughed coldly. I'm unsure though, is this act done out of kindness, or maliciousness? The next moment her voice was filled with killing intent. Unfortunately, it's merely an insignificant Nayland manner, yet now they want me to return. That all depends on whether I'm willing to return or not. Qin Lu's complexion changed as he bellowed, Third miss, you've been given face by Madam allowing you to return, but you have no shame. You're just an illegitimate child from a lowly and shameless woman. You're one who still kneels at our feet asking for food, or have you forgotten that? You still think of yourself as a miss from Nayland Manor? Pu. Wait for a bit and Nayland Manor will remove you from the family registry. We'll see how long it will take for you to die then. Qin Lu's voice was cut off with a grunt, his body forcefully lifted off the ground by a single hand at his throat. He opened his mouth wide and issued a ka sound, his whole face turning a mottled purple and red. Staring at the thin and weak little girl's hand which held him suspended, his eyes showed his shock and fear. Hashi smiled slightly at Qin Lu and asked with a gentle voice, By who, your master? How does he deal with insubordinate slaves who bully their master? Bai Hu gazed coldly at Qin Lu whose throat was still gripped by Hashi, and sinisterly said, It's execution by 1,000 cuts of course, then crushing the bones and scattering the ashes. This kind of filthy guy, don't tell me he will have to remain and keep dirtying my eyes. Qin Lu suddenly opened his eyes wide. They were filled with fear as he struggled with all his might and shouted with a hoarse voice, You wouldn't dare. Madam will not let you off. We still don't know who's willing to let who off. Invisible needles appeared like magic in Hush's hand, then suddenly, she jabbed them directly into his brain. Chapter 106. As she wishes. Qin Lu desperately struggled, however his eyes soon became expressionless, his consciousness disappearing. Hashi coldly asked, Tell me, why did Madame Nayland order me to return? Qin Lu opened his expressionless eyes wide while answering, Madame didn't want to let the second miss marry the young master of the Zhu family, but second miss's reputation has already been ruined and the Zhu family is refusing to let the matter go. So Madame thought of letting the plum tree wither in place of the peach tree, by getting the third miss to replace the second miss in marrying the young master of the Zhu family. They would then tell everyone that the young master of the Zhu family had made a mistake, that the person who admired young Master Zhu and stripped him was actually the third miss from Nayland Manor. If this were to happen, then the Nayland family and the Zhu family would still be related by marriage, and the second miss's reputation also wouldn't be damaged. So it's like this. The corner of Hush's mouth raised into a sneer, Zhu Zhongba is a cruel yet stupid fatty, moreover, he's also a womanizer. How was Madame Nayland going to ensure that I agreed to be married off as Nayland Feishua's replacement? Qin Lu responded, I don't know. All Sai Lu said was that Madame already had an absolutely sure method so that the third miss would get married, even if she wasn't willing. After Hashi heard all the information Qin Lu had to give, she withdrew her invisible needles, then threw him off to the side. Shi Jiao bowed before Hashi, Young master, do you need me to clean this up? Hashi nodded, and watching Shi Jiao drag the disabled Qin Lu away like a dead dog, her eyes didn't show the slightest trace of emotion. Once she turned her head, she came into contact with Bai Hu's shocked gaze. Miss Nayland, aren't you without a cultivation base? How are you able to control a person's consciousness? Hashi returned to her seat, and picking up the tea once more, she drank a mouthful before faintly saying, Have you forgotten what my job is? As long as you're familiar with the human body structure, you'll naturally be able to control other people as you wish. Bai Hu's heart trembled with fear. His whole body was taut, and the admiration and fear in his eyes became more pronounced. Right. Miss Nayland is the genius doctor that cured the meridian fractures of the Ouyang family's young master. Of course an insignificant person like Qin Lu wouldn't enter her eyes. But as an ordinary person who lacked a cultivation base, just relying on knowledge of the human body to control a martial artist's mind, Miss Nayland is really too shocking. Mustn't say it out loud though, It would shock everyone under heaven. Ah, really a person worthy of master taking a fancy to them. Thinking of this, Baihu stared at Hushi with a gaze brimming with passion, and eagerly said, Nayland Manor's people actually dared to bully Miss, and now they even want to deceive Miss into marrying that nuisance, that young master from the Zhu family. For that crime they ought to die 10,000 times. It would be better to let me go to properly give them a lesson, letting them know that they shouldn't overestimate their capabilities again. Hushi smiled a chilling smile as she glanced at him, causing the watching Baihu to become scared. Shaking her head, she said, It's not necessary. I've already decided to go back to Nayland Manor. Doesn't Madame Nayland want me married to Zhu Zhongba? I can do as she wishes, moreover, I'll properly repay her kindness. How can that be possible? Baihu roared, his face anxious as he said, Master definitely won't allow you to marry another person. You are masters. Under Hushi's cold gaze he automatically fell silent, even retreating back 2 steps due to fear. Baihu's heart was full of grief. Obviously he is an expert on gold core stage, yet why when he confronts Miss Nayland who lacks a cultivation base, does he always feel that his imposing manner means nothing to her? Instead, he would even be filled with a slight trace of fear. Hushi ordered Xiao Li to pack the food for Baihu, then coldly snorted as she said, Whoever I marry, it's up to me to choose. People who disappear without a trace, neglecting to inform me beforehand, what qualifications do they have to control my decisions? Chapter 107. I'll go back with you. As soon as she finished speaking, instead of letting Baihu continue stammering as he thought of what he could say, he was ruthlessly driven out of the courtyard. After dealing with Qin Lu and sending Baihu away, Hushi didn't immediately return to her room. Rather, she chose to continue sitting in the yard, calmly waiting. An hour later, as expected, someone came to visit this remote courtyard. It was Nayland Manor's butler, Wang Zhong. From his appearance, it seemed that Wang Zhong was no more than a simple and honest middle-aged man, possibly somewhere between 30 to 40 years old. With thick eyebrows framing big eyes, it would be easy to think that he was unsophisticated judging by what he was wearing. In reality though, his cultivation base is the highest amongst the slaves in Nayland Manor. He had already reached the peak of the foundation establishment stage, and soon, he would be able to break through to the meridian stage. As he walked over, his gaze swept over the pool of blood on the ground, his eyebrows wrinkling slightly. In the courtyard there still remained the aura of an expert far higher than himself, causing fear to rise within Wang Zhong. While he was looking around, his gaze finally landed on Hushi, who was still leisurely drinking tea, and the suspicion in his eyes became more pronounced. This is that legendary incompetent and cowardly third miss of Nayland Manor who was judged as trash and driven away. Yet seeing her appearance now, although she was malnourished and sickly, without a trace of spiritual power, the expression in her eyes was radiant. Where does she resemble a weak and cowardly person? Could it be said that because there's an expert who's supporting this third miss from behind the scenes, that she was able to be so arrogant? Even Qin Lu had suffered under her evil scheme. Humph. She really has an exaggerated opinion of her abilities for a young girl. Did she think that just because she had managed to find a patron that she would be able to confront Nayland Manor? This being said, it's only an ordinary person who would be taken advantage of. Wang Zhong's heart was full of disdain, but on the surface he acted respectful. This old slave has come carrying Madame's order. Third miss, please return back to the manor. Hushi placed the cup of tea down, lightly laughing, if I don't return? Wang Zhong's eyes narrowed, and without any warning, severe power was suddenly flowing from his body. The power pressure belonged to a high-level martial artist, causing the complexions of Zhongsan, Shi Jiao, and the others who were originally guarding Hushi, to change. Some of them with a relatively weak cultivation base even felt their knees turn soft as they fell to the ground with a thump. Even Hushi's complexion somewhat paled, her body sitting beside the table stone slightly trembling. Wang Zhong became pleased as he looked at these weak people. They were like ants as they trembled in front of him. Slowly, he withdrew his spiritual power. A respectful smile was still plastered across his face, but his eyes showed his contempt and a promise for violence. This old slave came with Madame's order, I must bring Third Miss back. If Third Miss insists on being disagreeable, Then this old slave will have no choice but to tie third miss up and return with you bound like that. Hashi slightly lowered her eyes, the expression on her small shallow face unreadable. Yet, as if she was intimidated and fearful, you could see her hair slightly trembling. After a long while, Wang Zhong finally heard her quiet voice, "Okay, I'll go back with you." Wang Zhong nodded his head in satisfaction. His opinion of Hashi had lowered even more, and he now firmly believed that she was still just a coward and incompetent trash. At most, she only hugged a thigh that wasn't thick enough, it was simply too weak to be feared. As for Qin Lu, who knew whether he was killed or injured? He was trash with no strength that only knew how to flatter people. No one in the manor was worried about his life or death. Hashi was just about to jump into the carriage that Wang Zhong had arranged, when from behind, wet nurse Chen anxiously called out to her, Miss, let this old slave and Xiao Li accompany you back. In the future, you shall stand in Naylan Manor, becoming a genuine young miss. What will you do if you don't have a wet nurse and servant girl beside you?" Wet nurse Chen's eyes were full of hope, as if longing for Hashi to become a miss of Naylan Manor so that she could have a promising future. The corner of Hashi's mouth revealed the trace of a cold smile as she slowly said, "Since wet nurse wants to go with me, then I'll bring you. Xiao Li, you stay here to continue monitoring the training of Shi Jiao and the others. Wait here until I come back." Chapter 108. Madame Naylan. Xiao Li promptly answered yes, not doubting Hashi's orders at all. Without waiting for wet nurse Chen to respond, Hashi quickly pulled her into the carriage. Since wet nurse still had delusions about Naylan Manor and her cheap father, then this time she'll give wet nurse's naive hopes the opportunity to vanish. In Yangjing City, as one of the 4 great families, Naylan Manor's reputation could be described as outstanding. When you add to this that Naylan Zhengze is the highest-ranking doctor in all of Jinling Kingdom, and that he's a junior member of the Doctors Association, many people would beseech Naylan Zhengze for treatment. Therefore, since Murong Yaru, now Madame Naylan, had married into the Naylan family, she had been enjoying the admiration and envy of others as part of a noble family. Wherever she went, people would fawn upon her, giving her respect. However, Madame Naylan had recently been worried about the rumors surrounding Naylan Feishue, giving her white hair. Spending all day inside Naylan Manor, she didn't dare go out to attend any parties. This is because the rumors about Naylan Feishue had now spread throughout all of Yangjing City, causing the Naylan family to look like a joke. What Naylan Feishue took a fancy to the young master of the Zhu family, and failing to seduce him, she used force. What Naylan Feishue's innocence was taken by the young master of the Zhu family, so due to rage out of humiliation, she whipped the young master of the Zhu family to vent her anger. The rumors continued like this and they were now known by everyone. Madame Naylan had educated Naylan Feishue herself as she grew up, so if Naylan Feishue's reputation was ruined, wouldn't it be said that she, Murong Yaru, had failed to teach her daughter well? Wouldn't this affect the future of her son and older daughter later on? This is what Madame Naylan couldn't bear about the whole situation. However, the Zhu family insisted that the one who stripped Zhu Zhongba was Naylan Feishue. They even produced Naylan Feishue's personal token, and that personal token's design had made an uproar in Yangjing City, so Naylan Manor was unable to deny it. Unfortunately, as it happened, her daughter, Naylan Feishue, was currently on a journey to train and wasn't at home. So even if she wanted her daughter to personally explain what had happened, there was no way it was achievable. Not to mention, with Madame Naylan's understanding of her daughter, it's possible that she really might have done such a thing. Finally, after being reminded by wet nurse who is always beside her, Madame Naylan thought of using the concubine's daughter, Naylan Hashi. That girl who had been abandoned at the outside courtyard for over 10 years. Thinking of Naylan Hashi, Madame Naylan also unavoidably recalled that woman. With a stunning appearance that could overturn the world, a noble and cold temperament, and arrogant eyes that overlooked anyone who came near. She was obviously only a concubine, yet her manner was like that of a flower growing on a high mountain. Even her own husband wasn't in her sight. Until today, every time Madame Naylan thought of that woman's indifferent expression when looking at her, she would become so angry that she trembled all over. Yet Madame Naylan's husband had loved that woman so much and was extremely respectful towards her. Even more, he hadn't allowed anyone to get close to her or harm her. She was a shameless slut who seduced men. Why should she have had to treat her well? Keep dreaming. Fortunately, after that woman had given birth to a daughter, she had died. Moreover, that daughter is an ugly person that is unable to cultivate, completely not inheriting even a little bit of her character and beauty. This lowly kind of daughter, before she could hinder her path, it's better to get rid of her now. Thinking of this pleased her, causing a carefree and vicious smile to appear on Madame Nayland's face. It was just at this moment though that a servant came in to report, "Madam, third miss has arrived." Soon after, wearing a rough coat made for a man and without any sort of hairpin in her hair, a little girl accompanied by an old wet nurse unhurriedly entered the room. Chapter 109, Hypocritical Show of Affection. The girl looked to be about 16 to 17 years old, yet unlike the soft and fresh visage of a girl of that age, her skin was dry and sallow. Her gaze was turned down, clearly displaying her swollen eyelids and the obvious bags under her eyes. With these kinds of looks, even the servants in the manor were looked after better than her. If anyone were to say that she was the third miss from Nayland Manor, who would believe them? Just thinking about how much pain that woman in the underworld would feel if she knew this, if she could see her own daughter's miserable and petty appearance now, caused Madame Nayland's heart to surge with intense joy. But contrary to these emotions, the expression on Madame Nayland's face was one of distress, and in a noble manner she beckoned the girl closer. After examining Hashi up and down for a long while, she finally sighed, "You are Hashi? Poor child, how can you be so thin?" Saying so, her sharp eyes swept over the people present and landed on Wang Zhong. "Butler Wang, how have I instructed you all?" Although third miss was sent to the other courtyard by old master, she's still a young miss of the Nayland family. All food and clothing expenses must be according to young Mrs. specifications. Yet look at her now. Why has Hashi become so thin? In the end, did you send people who would serve third miss properly? Wang Zhong, who was somewhat terrified as he was being scolded, lowered his head and said, "Madam, your words really wrong this old slave. We have always picked the best foods and materials to send to the other courtyard. There's never been a shortage of crystal stones or silver tail." But, Madame Nayland's long shapely eyebrows raised, "But? You're not going to quickly say it?" Wang Zhong answered while glancing slyly at wet nurse Chen, "But, this is the first time this old slave personally went to visit the other courtyard, so it is only now that I've learnt that the slaves in that courtyard are all outrageous. They're not only not looking after third miss properly, they're also taking advantage of her and secretly deducting a lot of the food and clothing expenses. This is the reason why third miss has fallen to such a degree." Madame Nayland's eyes flashed, her gaze falling on wet nurse Chen as she stood behind Hashi. Suddenly, she shouted loudly, "Such a daring old slave," still not kneeling down quickly. Wet nurse Chen was so scared by the shout that she was trembling, her face completely terrified. Two servants quickly approached, and standing on her left and right, they forced her to kneel. The corner of Madame Nayland's mouth raised slightly before quickly vanishing into a grief-filled expression, and she said in a disgusted tone, "Wet nurse Chen, in the past when you harmed my Xian I only punished you by letting people disable your cultivation base. You were sent to the other courtyard to atone for your crimes by properly serving third miss. Yet, you actually haven't changed and neglected your care of third miss. At that time I tolerated you, but this time, for my pitiful Hashi, I definitely won't spare you. Servants, drag this wicked slave away and flog her 100 times, regardless of whether she lives or dies." Wet nurse Chen was currently an ordinary person without spiritual power. If she were to be flogged 100 times, she wouldn't be able to protect herself. "Yes, dash." The two servants that were holding wet nurse Chen down replied loudly, and started to drag her out of the room. Wet nurse Chen suddenly returned to her senses and fiercely struggled, "Madam, I didn't do it. I didn't harm young Master Xian. I didn't betray young miss. Don't believe these vicious lies attacking me." Wang Zhong coldly snorted from the side, "When I went to the courtyard, I personally saw you ordering people about while acting all arrogant and bossy towards third miss. You simply have no respect for third miss, and now you still dare to lie in front of Madam. Quickly drag her away." Wet nurse Chen struggled with all her might while shouting, but she was no match compared to the strength of the two servants. Her eyes slowly showed despair. Chapter 110, Nayland Manor's Demon's Weight. A clear and beautiful woman's voice suddenly sounded. That voice wasn't heavy and the tone was calm, but it echoed in everyone's ears, causing the two servants' movements to halt. Hushie lifted her head, her tranquil and deep eyes looked at Madame Nayland's surprised expression, and the corner of her mouth lifted into a faint smile. It said that Madame Nayland is benevolent and noble, so why must Hushie see a bloody scene on arrival? Hushie's courage is small. If Nayland Manor is so terrible, I think I'll go back to my small courtyard and stay there. Madame Nayland's eyes opened wide. She couldn't believe that Nayland Hushie actually had the guts to speak to her like this. Is this really Nayland Hushie? Hushie wasn't concerned with what Madame Nayland thought, and directly walking forward, she grabbed wet Nurse Chen from the two servants and helped her to stand. The two servants felt their hands that were gripping wet Nurse Chen tightly loosen. They didn't know how, but they suddenly felt pain in their elbows, and following that, their whole bodies became numb. Finding themselves unable to move even a single step, wet Nurse Chen was easily taken from their hands. Wet Nurse Chen's face was covered in tears, her expression full of remorse and guilt as she looked at Hushie. It was at this moment that she finally realized, these people didn't receive her miss back to let her live comfortably, rather, it was because they wanted to push her into a pit of fire. She was so stupid, always pressuring Miss to return to Nayland Manor, and now she had actually put her Miss in danger. Miss, Hushie patted her arm, and using her internal energy, her voice entered wet Nurse Chen's ears. These demons, I simply don't care about them, I only needed wet nurse to understand this. Now, listen to my instructions, don't believe any of the people in this manor. This includes Nayland Zhengze, you must not believe him. Wet nurse, can you do that? Wet Nurse Chen nodded repeatedly. How could she still believe the people in this manor after all of this? Hushie nodded her head in satisfaction. She didn't blame wet Nurse Chen for wanting her to return to Nayland Manor. Because on the surface, it indeed seemed that Nayland Manor always gave material assistance these past years to Nayland Hushie. As for being sent to the other courtyard where there was a lack of spiritual energy, since her meridians were broken, it would have no effect on her. In addition, Nayland Zhengze had passed down an order that no one was allowed to harm Nayland Hushie's life. This had led to wet Nurse Chen and the original Nayland Hushie to have delusions about this father, believing that his decision was because he cared about their father-daughter bond. However, Hushie snorted at this way of thinking. If he really cared about their father-daughter bond, would he have thrown away his own daughter to a remote area, never meeting her for many years, unconcerned about her welfare? Then the feelings of this father for his daughter were too cheap. As for not allowing anyone to harm Nayland Hushie's life, that was most likely because she still had some value. Nayland Zhengze, this doctor, it seemed that he was very different from the kind and upright doctor that he portrayed. Hushie turned around, and coming into contact with Madame Nayland's shocked expression, she couldn't help but lightly lift the corners of her mouth, revealing a faint smile. Madame Nayland's face twisted, yet in the next moment and with great difficulty, she managed to plaster a concerned and blame-filled expression back onto her face. Hushie, you're still young, you don't understand how hateful that group of wicked slaves are, you were deceived by them. This wet Nurse Chen is really too hateful, I can't feel assured if I were to let her stay beside you. If you want servants, this manor has many, I can even give you the servant I'm proudest of, Sai Lu. Chapter 111, You won't blame me, right? Hushie slightly raised her eyebrows and meaningfully said, What Madam said is correct. Previously in the other courtyard, Butler Li and that group of slaves humiliated me every day. They would bully me for their amusement and said it was all Madam's order, but wet Nurse Chen, as a slave from Nayland Manor, opposed Butler Li going against Madam's order. She put her own life at risk to protect me. This kind of dedicated slave, Nayland Manor still won't spare her. Hearing what was said, Madame Nayland's complexion changed and she sharply shouted, What nonsense are you talking about? How can I order people to bully you? Hushie, who taught you to be so ignorant of the relationships between people that you would slander an elder? Hushie lightly laughed, This isn't talking nonsense, but let's call over my current slaves in the other courtyard to confront them and see. Oh, and in order for it to be fair, I suggest we have a public trial outside Nayland Manor's gate. If I really have slandered my elders, then it'll be good to let everyone criticize me together. Isn't that so? The muscles on Madame Nayland's face twitched strangely, while her hands made cracking sounds as they clenched at her sides. Yet in the end she endured it, and with difficulty, she plastered a smile on her face. A public trial, you say? I love you dearly and regard you as my own daughter. How can I not believe that what you have said is true? Those slaves used my name to deliberately make things difficult for you. That group of damned slaves. Indeed, a group of damned slaves. Hashi continued, saying, therefore, I've already punished them, yet it was without authority. Madam won't blame me, right? Madame Nayland's face showed a shocked expression, and when her eyes made contact with Wang Zhong's own, she saw him nod, then shake his head. Her gaze was somewhat filled with contempt as she looked at Hashi, and she couldn't help but coldly snort, calming down her heart. With an amiable smile once again hanging on her face, her voice gentle as she said, for just several insignificant slaves, how could I blame you? Hashi, you've suffered hardships. In the future when you return to the Nayland family, I'll give you a tonic to nurse your body back to health. I've already ordered people to pack up your courtyard, and you can rest assured, since Wet Curse Chen loyally protected you, I will let her continue to serve you. What do you think? Hashi nodded her head, slightly lowering her eyes as she replied, then I'll trouble Madam. Madame Nayland's eyes revealed a smile, and suddenly she waved her hand while raising her voice. Did all of you already bring the things I ordered you to prepare for third miss? Her voice barely fell, when several maids and servants entered the room walking in a row. Some carried chests, some carried teacups, while others still were holding trays, yet all of them were smiling as they walked in. Madame Nayland pointed at the chests and trays, saying, these are clothes and jewelry I specially ordered people to prepare for you. In the future you will be a proper third miss of Nayland Manor, and as such, you will be representing Nayland Manor's face, so you can't be dressed so plainly again. The chests were opened and inside were luxurious dresses, while placed on the trays were fine pieces of jewelry. For a martial artist these items wouldn't have any usefulness, so they weren't worth more than a few crystal stones. But for the original Nayland Hashi, these ordinary clothes and pieces of jewelry were things she had never seen before. Madame Nayland noticed Hashi staring fixedly at the clothes and jewelry, and a satisfied expression showed on her face while a coldness flashed in her eyes. Reaching out, she picked up the teacup that was carried to her side, then handed over it to Hashi. This tonic is something I ordered people to begin stewing since early this morning. It contains high-quality ginseng and snow lotus herb. It's useful for improving one's appearance and nourishing one's skin. Hashi, quickly drink it while it's still warm. Hashi took the tonic, and opening the lid, a strong fragrance immediately assaulted her nostrils. Once open, Hashi knew right away that a lot of high-quality ingredients were added, yet that definitely wasn't all. Chapter 112, Staging a Good Play. For example, the slightly sweet fragrance from red brocade mugwort, some sour myriad arrowgrass, as well as pure sweetness from a cage core fruit, TSK. This may be more expensive compared to ordinary ginseng and snow lotus herb. Can Madame Nayland really be so eager to part with her hard-earned savings? However, with this tonic that she was given, it would result in Hashi losing her mind, gradually turning her into an idiot. Hashi smiled, and under Madame Nayland's burning gaze, she drained the tonic in the teacup in one gulp. Good. Madame Nayland's face showed a satisfied smile, yet her eyes filled with scheming. Later on, every day around this time, I will order the servants to deliver the tonic to you. Hashi, you must obediently drink it. Wait until after you've drunk it for 7 days, you will then become my puppet. At that time, I will let you experience living but not life, and dying yet not death. Living in Nayland Manor was naturally much more extravagant and relaxing compared to the other courtyard. Every day there were delicacies of all kinds to taste, satin and silk dresses, and beautiful servant girls catering to every whim. But Wet Nurse Chen's face was full of anxiety. After noticing Madame's personal servant, Sai Lu, fixedly watch Hashi drink the tonic before leaving, she then lowered her voice and said, Miss, why has Madame ordered a servant to deliver tonic to you every day? They also insist that you have to drink it all. A moment after leaving, Sai Lu was no longer able to suppress the expression on her face, revealing a pleased smile. Hashi slightly sneered, Wet Nurse, rest assured, after today no one will deliver tonic again. Moreover, a good play will soon begin. Yet wet Nurse Chen was not feeling reassured, her entire face instead creasing, and suddenly, she swung her hand, firmly slapping her own palm. This is all the blame of this old fool for not being cautious and always telling Miss to return. Who would have imagined that the reason they let you come back is to force you to become the second Mrs. Scapegoat? Miss, I'm really sorry, even more, I've let Madam down. Hushie had no idea how to comfort her, and showing a disdainful smile said, with this small scheme she wants to push me into a pit of fire. Madam Nayland really underestimates me too much. Wet Nurse, don't forget, I'm a person who has crawled back from the gates of hell. Hush's words were not at all gentle and soft, but miraculously, they caused Wet Nurse Chen to settle down. Looking at the young Miss's indifferent expression, she felt that in just over a month young Miss had matured and grown stronger, becoming a master that everyone in the other courtyard relied on. If Madam's soul in heaven could see Miss like this, she would probably feel very happy. Just as Hushie expected, after she drank the 7th cup of tonic, Madam Nayland thought she now had a foolproof plan and began to arrange for the Zhu family's father and son to visit once again. The Zhu family can be considered as a well-known and wealthy family in Jinling Kingdom. Zhu family's master, Zhu Ichun's madam, came from an outstanding and famous sect, while his younger sister, Zhu Rao, married into the royal family and became an imperial concubine. Zhu Rao gave birth to the 6th prince, and that prince is doted upon most by the emperor. Just going off family backgrounds, the Zhu family and the 4 great families can stand side by side. Unfortunately, the shrewd and powerful master Zhu happens to have a stupid pig for a son. Not only was he weak, he was also ugly. Every day he would frequent brothels and kidnap women from lower-class families. He didn't yet have a main wife, but he already had 7 to 8 rooms full of concubines. With him resembling an ignorant and incompetent pig like this, which decent family's young Miss would be willing to marry him? As it happened, only young women from small families would be interested, which Master Zhu despised. This had resulted in Zhu Zhongba's marriage being delayed. Chapter 113. How could you be here? When Master Zhu learnt that Zhu Zhongba was beaten, he had become extremely furious. Yet when he knew it was Nayland Manor's second Miss, Nayland Feishue, that had whipped and stripped his son's clothes, his anger immediately turned into happiness. Just the thought of it made him very happy. It didn't need to be said that the Nayland family's background is above that of the Zhu family, and that moreover, Nayland Feishue is famous in Jinling Kingdom as a genius martial artist. At such a young age she had already reached the early ranks of the foundation establishment stage, otherwise, the Ouyang family wouldn't have even considered marrying her to Ouyang Haoshuan. Master Zhu had already given up hope regarding the ability of Zhu Zhongba's cultivation base and his knowledge, but if he were to marry a talented wife from a family with a successful background, when a grandson is born, wouldn't he be the best choice as the Zhu family's heir? With this idea, the Zhu family wouldn't let go of this golden opportunity. They would take Nayland Feishue as a wife, even if it meant ruining her reputation. Originally the Nayland family had refused to yield, yet 2 days ago the Zhu family suddenly heard the news that they were welcome to visit and propose marriage. Master Zhu beamed with joy on the spot, and for the sake of insurance they even invited the 6th prince as a witness, then grandly headed towards Nayland Manor. Early in the morning, Madam Nayland ordered servants to clean up the main hall, and directed for people to invite Hushie over. At this moment, Hushie's complexion was still as shallow as before, but her tranquil and deep eyes from several days ago had now become dull and expressionless, while an occasional timid and fearful expression would flash across her face. A trace of happiness passed through Madam Nayland's heart. She had planned well and everything was all prepared. Today she'll definitely be able to settle the problem that's been pressuring her these last several days. However, when she saw the procession of people following Master Zhu, Madam Nayland's complexion suddenly became green and white. Among the group of people that came, apart from Master Zhu, Zhu Zhongba, and the 6th prince, unexpectedly, there was a handsome young man standing straight and tall. That young man's face was extremely familiar, so familiar to Madame Nayland that once she saw him her eyes opened wide and she uncontrollably exclaimed, "Ouyang Haoshuan, how can you be here?" That's right, the person who came is Ouyang Haoshuan. The same person who half a year ago was still reclining on a bed only half alive, the one whose marriage was withdrawn by the Nayland family, that Ouyang Haoshuan. Ouyang Haoxuan hadn't yet spoken, so the sixth prince stepped forward, smiling as he spoke. Haoxuan is my friend, he fell ill and was confined to a bed. Now that he's finally completely recovered, I brought him with us to relieve his boredom. Madame Naylan will not take offense, right? How could this be? Madame Naylan's face was white as she yelled. Old Master said that no one was able to cure his illness, that he would be a useless person for a lifetime, so the words Madame Naylan spoke didn't bother Ouyang Haoxuan, but the expression of the sixth prince sank. He is currently fighting over the position of emperor, and the assistance he receives from the Ouyang family is extremely important. Originally, due to Ouyang Haoxuan's illness, the Ouyang family had no time to bother about who to back as emperor, while he is also not very good at gaining support. Now that Ouyang Haoxuan had finally recovered, coupled with the fact that their previous relationship was pretty good, he naturally grasped this opportunity. How can he tolerate other people slandering Ouyang Haoxuan? The sixth prince's gaze burned as he coldly stared at Madame Naylan. Does Madame Naylan realize what you've said? Haoxuan is this prince's friend. If you slander my friend again, this prince is obliged to have no other choice than to return and report this to royal father. Chapter 114. Will not ignore the second miss. At this moment Ouyang Haoxuan finally stepped forward, and stopping the sixth prince, he slightly smiled. Sixth prince, don't get angry. Through the seriousness of my illness I was able to clearly see people's true faces. Due to misfortune my Ouyang family and myself are actually very lucky, as I don't have to marry a snake-hearted wife. I ought to thank the Naylan family, as I feel very grateful. Zhuichun, standing on the side, immediately laughed out loud while stroking his beard. My Zhu family aren't the tiniest bit afraid of taking a snake-hearted woman as a wife. The woman will become one of our Zhu family's people, and for a pungent and vicious daughter-in-law, our Zhu family has plenty of methods to teach her. It won't even take us a year to make her obedient, turning her into my son's good wife. In this regard, Madame Naylan doesn't need to be worried. Our Zhu family will definitely not ignore the second miss. The muscles on Madame Naylan's face continuously twitched while it flushed due to shame. To prevent herself from releasing a sharp and vulgar curse, her hands hanging at her sides were clenched so tightly the veins showed. Seeing Ouyang Haoxuan's handsome face, with his body naturally emitting an elegant imposing manner, it was a very sharp contrast compared to Zhu Zhongba, who resembled a pig. Madame Naylan regretted until her intestines were green. She didn't think that Ouyang Haoxuan would ever be able to recover. Old Master had diagnosed that he would be permanently crippled, so in the end, who was it that cured him? If she had known earlier that it was going to be like this, marrying Fei Xue into the Ouyang family is absolutely the better choice. But now, everything is ruined. Madame Naylan grit her teeth in regret until a cracking noise could be heard, but Zhuichun didn't care about her expression as his small, bright and shiny eyes stared fixedly at Madame Naylan. Madame Naylan, today we have come to propose marriage. After all, the second miss and my son already have an intimate physical relationship, so if my son doesn't marry her, then isn't the reputation of the second miss forever ruined? I say it's better for Madame to call the second miss out. Letting the two young people meet each other will be good, and it'll be best if we set the marriage date today. Madame Naylan heard the three words intimate physical relationship, and the veins on her forehead bulged. Her gaze swept over Ouyang Haoxuan's almost mocking smile and her heart felt anxious, yet she still ordered a servant to bring Hushi out. After a moment, a girl wearing a pink gauze skirt covered with a transparent light muslin, with her hair rolled into two buns on the top of head, walked out supported by a servant on either arm. Once Zhu Zhongba saw that girl, bewilderment flashed in his eyes as they opened widely in shock. Zhu Zhongba suddenly rushed forth in anger while opening his big mouth to curse. The girl slightly lifted her head from its previously lowered position and revealed a sinister smile towards him. Zhu Zhongba, having learnt his lesson once, immediately halted and felt a burst of pain all over, his voice stuck in his throat. The next second, he saw the girl flip her palm over, flashing the slave card in her hand towards him. He then felt a stabbing pain in his brain, and following that, his consciousness began to fade with only a command echoing in his mind, leaving him no other choice but to comply. Out of the people present, none of them noticed Hush's small action except Ouyang Haoxuan. Standing to the side he glanced at her and Zhu Zhongba yet didn't say anything, a smile visible in the depth of his eyes. Madame Naylan grabbed Hush's hand and pulled her towards the Zhu father and son. On that day, the one that had a physical relationship and conflict with young Master Zhu Zhongba was this child. She's also a young miss of our Naylan manor. In regards to a connection by marriage between your Zhu family and my Naylan family, our families are well matched in terms of social status, so this can be considered an appropriate match. Chapter 115, Achieving a Good Marriage. Madame Naylan's words hadn't yet finished, when Zhu Zhongba, under the control of Hushi, started jumping and shouting, "It's not her. Dad, it's not this ugly person. Does Naylan Manor take me as a fool to play with? An ugly, useless, and saltless woman like this, how could this young master even look at her? Moreover, Naylan Feishue is known as a shrewish vixen, yet look this timid and weak person, how is she the same as Naylan Feishue?" Zhu Ichun's complexion sank in a split second, and coldly directed at Madame Naylan, "Madame Naylan, what is the meaning of this? Taking an unknown female servant and getting her to act as a substitute, do you think my Zhu family is fun to mess with? With that being the case, don't blame me for becoming hostile. Your Highness Sixth Prince, when we return I must meet with Gui Fei, 1, to inform her about Naylan Manor taking advantage of their position to bully my Zhu family. We'll see if your Naylan family's daughter will still be able to be married off in the future or not." Sixth Prince smiled and nodded, his expression was of one watching a good play. Madame Naylan became anxious, quickly saying, "This is Hushi, our Naylan Manor's third miss, definitely not an unknown female servant. If Master Zhu does not believe me, you can go to the city to check the household register. You'll then be able to see whether or not Naylan Manor has a third miss called Naylan Hushi." Pausing, Madame Naylan slowly released a sigh, her face showing remorse and grief. "This is also my fault for not strictly teaching my daughter. A few days ago we learnt that because Feishue was absent from Naylan Manor, with a heart full of grievance, she unexpectedly pretended to be Feishue and prostituted herself in Gluttonous House, hoping to find her ideal husband. We and Feishue were unaware of this matter until a few days ago when Hush's personal servant revealed everything. Only then did we know that she and young Master Zhu already had a close physical relationship. Although this is unreasonable, it can be considered that the Zhu family and our Naylan family were predestined to have a relationship. To be able to achieve a good marriage by fate would be beneficial for both of our families, right?" Hushi felt like applauding when she heard Madame Naylan's words, because as to the truth of this matter, she had guessed about a lot of it. Moreover, these words also hinted to Zhu Ichun that if the Zhu family wanted to form a connection by marriage with the Naylan family, they would have to accept Hushi. In the first place, with the Naylan family's background and Naylan Zhengzhe's medical expertise, the benefit of a marriage between the two families would be great, while neither parties would suffer a loss. So why would he be confused about which young miss of the Naylan family his son should marry? Zhu Ichun showed a contemplative expression on his face. Was he beginning to consider this proposal? However, will Hushi let Madame Naylan succeed? Of course not. Suddenly, they heard Zhu Zhongba once again shout, "Naylan Hushi? Isn't that the famous trash of the Naylan family, without a cultivation base and an ugly appearance? If I married her, who knows what sort of son would be born, wouldn't he be useless trash? Dad, I don't want to marry her. You see her cowardly and useless appearance, how could she have managed to beat me up into a pig? No matter what, my cultivation base is still rank 9 of the Qi refining stage, so how could I be beaten all over by this woman who doesn't have even the littlest bit of spiritual power? If this were to be spread in the future, how would I conduct myself? Dad, Naylan Manor simply want to substitute in shoddy goods, making fun of us, so Dad, you absolutely cannot agree to them." Zhu Ichun's expression sunk in a flash. Although his son's words were unpleasant to hear, they are still true. Noticing the young girl's lowered head and her dim-witted appearance, one look was all it took for him to know that she wasn't favored in the Naylan family. Even if his son were to marry her, how much assistance would the Zhu family actually be able to obtain? It's simply a child thrown out by the Naylan family. 1. Gui Fei means senior concubine. Here it's referring to the sixth prince's mother, Zhu Ichun's younger sister, Zhu Rao, who married the emperor. Chapter 116. Naylan Zhengzhe. Thinking of this, The expression in Juichun's eyes became gloomy and cold, and with a stern voice he said, "Where's Nailan Zhengze? I want to ask him if he still wants his reputation as the #1 doctor of Jinling Kingdom." Unexpectedly, he condones his wife and child's behavior of fooling and deceiving my Zhu family. "I came today to propose marriage and give your Nailan manner face in accepting Nailan Feisue as a member of my Zhu family, yet if we were following tradition and only bringing a small sedan to receive her as a concubine, no one would dare say anything." You dare!" Madame Nailan screamed, no longer able to tolerable his words. "You should take a look at what kind of a person your Zhu family's son is. He's now almost 30 years old and hasn't even reached the foundation establishment stage, whereas my daughter is a peerless talented who is only 18 years old and has already reached the foundation establishment stage. Your son wishing to marry my Feisue is like a toad wanting to eat swan meat. Don't even think about it. I'll warn you now, either you set the marriage between your Zhu family and Nailan Hushi today, or you can get lost. Do you think that Nailan Manor is afraid of your Zhu family? She will absolutely not allow her baby daughter to marry this kind of idiot, especially in front of Ouyang Haoshuan." Madame Nailan's threat made the complexion of the Zhu family father and son, as well as that of the sixth prince, become extremely ugly. Madame Nailan even resorted to shoving Hushi herself, roaring, "Quickly speak, say that you admire young Master Zhu and want to marry him as a main wife. A few days ago, wasn't it you who told me that you fell in love at first sight with young Master Zhu at Gluttonous House, so therefore you followed him to Zhu Manor?" After Hashi was pushed, she staggered a bit, and with her legs soft, she simply sat down on the chair beside her. Since the beginning her head had been hanging low, her body shivering, while a timid and pitiful expression was frozen on her face. With the look of one being bullied, her mouth kept saying, I, as if she was unable to say a complete sentence, making Juichun believe more than ever that she was being forced. Only Ouyang Haoshuan had slowly seen the clues of what was happening, but for him to be able to see the Nailan family and Nailan Feisue have bad luck, of course he wouldn't expose it. Instead, he added fuel to the fire. He laughed lightly, and as if he was gossiping to the sixth prince said, "I'm still unsure of when Madame Nailan become Nailan Manor's master. At the time they withdrew marriage it was like this, and now with the Zhu family, it's exactly the same situation. Dr. Nailan never actually shows his face by being present, so people who know him will say that Dr. Nailan is busy, but people who don't know him will think that Dr. Nailan is a weak and incompetent man, relying on his wife and child to act as the bad people." The sixth prince laughed when he heard this and was about to reply when a servant suddenly started calling in a panic from outside the door, "Master, you've come?" Madame Nailan's complexion changed while panic and fright swirled in her eyes one after another, and suddenly grabbing Hush's clothes, she abruptly started twisting the fabric. All this time Nailan Zhengze had actually been in the manor, but he was in his basement researching medicine. Regarding the matter of Nailan Feisue, Madame Nailan had mentioned it to him, yet he had been unwilling to respond. So Madame Nailan had no choice but to think of a way to restore her daughter's and Nailan Manor's reputation by herself. In fact, there is no way that it was possible for Hushi to be a substitute, as Nailan Zhengze had already ordered earlier, that without his permission, no one was allowed to use Hushi. If he knew of what she was doing now. Thinking of her cold and fickle husband, Madame Nailan's body couldn't help but tremble. Chapter 117, slapping her face. From his outward appearance, Nailan Zhengze is a tall and handsome man. With a short moustache above his upper lip, a long fluttering beard and fair skin, his countenance was that of a refined sage. Yet the first time Hashi saw this person she felt a chill spread throughout her heart, especially when those fathomless eyes swept over her. It was like being stared at by a poisonous snake. The muscles in her body couldn't help but become taut. This cheap father, really wasn't a simple guy. Looking at Hashi, he noticed her head hanging low with a shivering and timid appearance, her face shallow and pale, and that she was still without spiritual power. Nothing was different from the last time he saw her. So Nailan Zhengze quickly shifted his line of sight, yet when his gaze fell on Ouyang Haoshuan, his eyes suddenly narrowed. His body stiffened for a long time before he then stepped forward, slightly nodding his head. "Young Master Ouyang, previously this old man learnt that his skills weren't good enough as I was unable to find a method to heal you. I don't know which genius doctor with magical hands and a miracle cure was able to fix your fractured meridians. When speaking, Nailan Zheng's expression was completely tranquil, while on the contrary, his eyes burned hate, unwillingness to accept his failure blazing fiercely. Ever since a rumor had spread in the streets about a young genius doctor being able to heal fractured meridians, he had continuously dispatched his people to secretly find him. As long as he managed to find that person and dig out his secrets, then he, Nailan Zhengze, would be able to become a genuine genius doctor. He would even be able to join the upper ranks of the Doctors' Association. However, all of his people had been searching for more than half a month with no results, yet the Ouyang family had managed to find him. For this genius doctor to cure Ouyang Haoxuan that he, Nailan Zhengze, had diagnosed as certainly going to die, it is simply slapping his face. Ouyang Haoxuan calmly looked at Nailan Zhengze, laughing lightly as he said, "There's no need for Dr. Nailan to be modest, your medical expertise is excellent. Compared to the other doctors, you concluded the earliest that I couldn't be cured, even neatly withdrawing the marriage agreement between your Nailan family and my Ouyang family. This judgment and decision-making ability, how can it at all compare to an insignificant genius doctor?" His words were full of mockery and ridicule, causing the Nailan family's complexion to turn green and white. The sixth prince even laughed out loud, from time to time even offering his own words of praise, but those words of praise were more like sarcasm. Rage flashed across Nailan Zhengze's face before he quickly recovered, and turning his head, he faced Zhuichun. "I was unaware that Master Zhu had paid a visit and was unable to welcome you. I'm very sorry." Zhuichun was roared at by Madame Nailan just a moment ago, so with his displeasure still written across his face, he coldly said, "Dr. Nailan doesn't have to speak so politely. Today I'm only here for an answer. Your daughter Nailan Feisue and my son Zhu Zhongba have an intimate physical relationship. My son was even whipped by her. Nailan Feisue belongs to us of the Zhu family. Today I ask the sixth prince to be a witness as we propose marriage and to give your Nailan family face. Yet who would have thought that your good wife would unexpectedly bring out a useless concubine's daughter instead? Using this third miss to fool us and wanting to make her act as a substitute, is this you wanting to step on my Zhu family's face?" The more Nailan Zhengze heard, the uglier his face became. After hearing everything, he suddenly turned around, and swinging his hand, he ruthlessly slapped his palm on Madame Nailan's face. Madame Nailan was completely caught off guard, her body falling to the ground with a thump. Clutching her red and swollen cheek with one hand, her eyes showed her shock and fear, her voice shaking. "My lord, you, how can you hit me?" Chapter 118. Foolish woman. Nailan Zhengze's eyes were ruthless as they swept over her, and he spoke only one sentence, "I'll settle this with you later." Then looking at Zhuichun again, with his face set in one of apology, he said, "My wife has behaved outrageously, acting like Master Zhu and the sixth prince are a joke. Regarding Feishue's matter, I've already investigated it, and since the Zhu family has Feishue's personal token, then it can be seen that the Nailan family and the Zhu family have a relationship. Since that's the case, for the two people involved to be able to form a connection, Feishue is honored. We hope that in the future after Feishue is married, that the Zhu family will be able to treat her well." Of course. Zhuichun, seeing that he had achieved his purpose, immediately beamed with joy. "Once second miss is married, she'll be one of my Zhu family's people, so as long she abides by how a woman is supposed to act, we of the Zhu family will naturally treat her well. Then since the marriage of our two families is decided, I also brought an invitation card for Zhongba's birthday celebration. I thought that it would be better to set the marriage for the same time. Tilda, my lord, you're crazy. How can Feishue marry this?" Madame Nailan's scream was immediately silenced under Nailan Zhengze's cold and sharp glare. As she clutched her cheek due to the numbing pain spreading throughout her face, thinking of her daughter's ruined future, her grief rose from within and caused her to quietly weep. Hashi squatted next to Madame Nailan and looked as if she wanted to help support her up, yet instead, she lightly wiped a colorless and odorless medicinal powder on Madame Nailan's wound. Madame Nailan fiercely shoved her away and cursed in a sharp voice, "Slut. It's you who caused trouble for my Feishue. Get lost, dash. Just get lost, dash." Hashi took advantage of the shove to tumble on the ground, and curling her body up, she started shivering. Nailan Zhengze glanced at her, still despising that cowardly and incompetent appearance, yet in the bottom of his heart he felt that something was fishy. But Naylan Zhangze had no time to think more about it as Zhuichun was urging him to hurry up. So he quickly led the few men in the room to his study to exchange invitation cards, and also set a date for Zhu Zhongba and Naylan Feishue's marriage. Although he was somewhat reluctant to part with Naylan Feishue, as she is after all a daughter he had raised at his knee, compared to the welfare of Naylan Manor, there is nothing that couldn't be sacrificed. Madame Naylan saw them leave to settle matters and all she could do was weep endlessly. Before leaving to follow them she instructed for Wang Zhong to send Hushi back to the other courtyard, and with a strict look, she declared that Hushi was never allowed to return to Naylan Manor again. As she watched the backs of the people leaving, Hushi finally raised her head with a smirk upon her face. "Madame Naylan, didn't you give me medicine for 7 days hoping that I would become an idiot? In that case, not reciprocating would be rude. I'll respond in kind by letting you suffer from advanced symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. You better hope that my cheap father is truly a genius doctor, otherwise, you'll be a deranged senile woman for the rest of your life." Late at night in the courtyard by Kang Mountain, stars are twinkling and the moonlight is perfect. Hushi was sitting alone on the roof of the highest building in the courtyard, lightly frowning as she gazed towards the vast sky full of stars. Tomorrow is the agreed-upon day that Nan Gongyu promised to lift the seal on her dantian, but that guy had disappeared for several days already, while these last 2 days by who had also not come. Before her eyes a man's handsome face slowly emerged, with a demonic and pampering smile, and that hot breath and a hug she couldn't oppose. Hush's face reddened and she secretly scolded bastard, but her originally jittery heart had gradually settled down. Nan Gongyu was mostly overbearing, leaving her little room to resist, but this man was serious when he made that promise, making her unconsciously want to believe him. Without any reason at all, she just believed that he wouldn't deceive her. Hushi was lost in thought when suddenly, she shivered from a coldness that froze her body, causing her to become alert and abruptly sit up. Chapter 119. Still useless trash. Within her range of spiritual perception, she could clearly sense several strong auras rapidly approaching her direction. The auras surrounding these people were unfamiliar and hidden, indicating that whatever they wanted, it obviously wasn't anything good. Hush's brows slightly wrinkled, and quickly concealing her aura, she leapt onto the roof of her own room to hide, yet still be able to monitor everything that occurred in her courtyard. Almost at the same time, 4 tall men with their bodies wrapped in black clothes quietly broke into the small courtyard. With Hushi currently lacking the slightest amount of spiritual power, she of course had no way to know what rank their cultivation bases were. But judging from the strong power pressure being emitted from their bodies, they weren't low-level martial artists. Amongst these 4 people, the man with the tallest stature waved his hand, sending the 3 other figures to quietly leap to every corner of the small courtyard. While the tallest masked man moved directly towards her bedroom. Hushi's heart shivered, and moving from her position, she rapidly entered the room from the rear window. It seemed that this group of people were rushing here for her because looking at their actions and attitude, they were making an utmost effort to not alarm the people in this courtyard. Since they were sneaking around, their purpose wouldn't be to kill anyone, but some other hidden motive. Since they only dared to secretly nose around, then she better beat them at their own game and see what they wanted. Moreover, this group of people's manner is suspicious. Their cultivation bases are much higher than hers, so if she was to collide with them, Hushi wasn't afraid for herself, but the people in this courtyard would most likely suffer. Once deciding on a plan, Hushi quickly lay down on the bed and closed her eyes to pretend to sleep. In order to not reveal any flaws, her consciousness entered her space, and from her space she observed the situation outside. After a moment, her bedroom door that was locked quietly opened, and a tall shadow quietly entered. The light from the moon and stars lit up the doorway, illuminating the black-clothed man's body. Hushi was holding her breath in anticipation, yet once she saw this, she frowned. Why did she feel that the black-clothed man's figure was somewhat familiar, as if she had seen it somewhere before? The man dressed in black walked to the front of bed, and seeing Hushi deeply sleep, a touch of suspicion flashed in his eyes as he examined her. He looked at the small shallow face for a long time, then suddenly he lifted his hand and placed it on Hushi's chest. Hashi startled in fright, thinking that he was going to kill her. Yet within the next moment, she felt a trace of icy cold spiritual power enter her body through the palm on her chest. It searched along her 4 limbs and hundreds of bones towards her dantian, finally gathering in her brain. Hashi suddenly opened her eyes wide in her space soul-searching technique. This black-clothed man is actually using the soul-searching technique on her. This is a technique that only a high-level cultivator was able to use against a low-level cultivator. Not only would they be able to dig out a person's memory, but if the person this technique was used against struggled and resisted, it would ultimately result in them becoming an idiot. In the end, who is this person that was so ruthless they used the soul-searching technique on Nayland Hashi? What is his purpose? Hashi rejoiced that fortunately her mind is hiding in her space, so even if this black-clothed man searched through every memory in her brain, he would only be able to sense her sleeping and nothing else. Sure enough, after the time it would take to burn half an incense stick, the black-clothed man began to exude a ruthless and irritated aura. There's nothing. Unexpectedly, there wasn't any useful information. As well as being unable to cultivate spiritual power in her dantian, this girl sleeping on the bed was clearly still useless trash. Chapter 120, Nayland Hashi's mother. Just then, the other black-clothed men that had been searching the small courtyard rushed in, conveying their results to the man standing over Hashi. This place is a spiritual energy wasteland, so even though they searched such a big courtyard, they couldn't find even one spiritual plant or a piece of crystal stone, let alone something like a jade slip. The black-clothed man glared fiercely at the sleeping soundly Hashi, and suddenly raising his hand, he reached down to strangle her. Hashi was scared as she watched from her space. At this moment, she clearly sensed the man's killing intent. He exuded loathing and detest, as if he was itching to dismember her body into pieces. All of Hashi's soft hair was standing on end as she resisted the almost unbearable urge to exit her space. Yet just as she was about to move, she heard the man suddenly start to talk with a low, hoarse voice. "I didn't expect that from the stunning you. All that would remain of your bloodline is actually trash destined to be bullied like this. If at that time you had obeyed me, hey, as things have reached this stage, I wonder if you regret your decision." Finished speaking, he withdrew his hand, and shouting a low withdraw, he then left the room. Once Hashi was certain that all the intruders had left, her consciousness exited her space and returned to her body. Touching her neck that still felt chilled, a trace of doubt emerged in her heart. What was the meaning of the last sentence that man had spoken? This stunning person, is that the mother of Nayland Hashi? However, Nayland Hashi's mother was obviously Nayland Zhengzhe's concubine. If she had really been peerless, how could she have been willing to be someone's concubine? Previously she had thought that Nayland Hashi is a daughter of an unfavored concubine from Nayland Manor. Petty and low, cowardly, and without the slightest innate talent for cultivating, even the most lowly servant hadn't paid attention to her. Yet now it seems that Nayland Hashi's identity is apparently not so simple. Hashi was puzzled as she got up to examine every corner of her small courtyard. The actions of these men were very careful. Although they had randomly dug 3-foot holes around the yard, the items arranged in the house hadn't been disturbed much, and everyone was still sleeping soundly. In the end, what was that group of black-clothed people looking for? At this moment, that group of black-clothed people that Hashi was wondering about were rapidly sneaking into Yangjing City, jumping between the high building walls. Several breaths later, they arrived in front of a huge residence of a high-ranking official. The leader of the black-clothed men took off his mask, and ripping off the black clothes, he strutted through the half-open side door. The remaining 3 men quietly hid, not entering the courtyard. Above this residence's gate hung an impressive and imposing plaque with 2 words, Nayland Manor. The leader of the black-clothed men is Yangjing City's most outstanding, famous, and #1 doctor, Nayland Zhengzhe. Nayland Zhengzhe's face was overcast as he walked into his study, and after confirming that no one was nearby, he quickly stepped in front of a redwood shelf, using one hand to rotate an ordinary-looking vase left and right a few times. The next moment the redwood shelf issued ka sounds, and shifting to the left and the right, it revealed an empty room. A simple pill furnace and some refining tools were set up, while on the left there was a spiral staircase leading down. In front of the pill furnace, there hung a picture of a beautiful woman. Nayland Zhangze slowly stepped forward, staring at the picture without blinking as he walked. On the slightly yellowed paper, a beautiful woman that could make a person have to pause and catch their breath vividly appeared. With long shapely eyebrows and phoenix eyes, a beautiful nose and snow-white skin, her cold and indifferent expression made her look like a goddess from the ninth heaven. Such a lofty woman would of course not bother with ordinary people. Chapter 121, Black-Clothed Man. If Hushi were here now, she would have been shocked to find that the woman in this picture is a 7 out of 10 in similarity with her transformed appearance. Lingyu, Lingyu, Nayland Zhangze repeated the woman's name over and over again. With an intoxicated expression on his face, he kissed the lips of the woman in the picture and murmured, "Lingyu, do you know how much I miss you?" He had barely spoken when suddenly, an hysterical-like light shone in his eyes born from insanity and hate. Retreating back a step, he roared, "You're just my concubine, but why do you look down on me? Why don't you obey me?" At this moment, a crackling sound could be heard coming from below the spiral staircase. Following that, a beast-like roar with banging and scratching sounds echoed. Nayland Zhangze's lips raised in a smirk, and laughing twice, he looked at the stunning woman in the picture, his face twisted with an evil smile. "And Lingyu, aren't you so proud and strong? But did you ever think that the child you would give birth to would fall into my hands for me to take advantage of?" Ha 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 ha. Because of the intrusion of the black-clothed men, Hushi didn't go to sleep, rather, she meditated in her space. She discovered that although she is unable to store spiritual power and advance cultivation bases, with the spiritual energy entering her body repeatedly, it cleansed her meridians. So whether it is in strength or speed, she has the qualifications to advance. Regarding internal power and martial arts, she is now 1 rank higher than she was in her previous life. As for the skill to conceal herself, she's already at a much higher rank than the low-level martial artists in this world. While cultivating, time passed slowly, and soon, the pitch-black night sky outside her space slowly lightened, and streaks of golden light colored the eastern sky. Hushi lazily stretched her body, and just as she was about to exit her space, a sudden chill flashed through her body, leaving her slightly numb. It was like there were countless insects crawling along her spine, causing every nerve in her body to become taut. The black-clothed men, it's those black-clothed men again. Moreover, there's still 4 of them. However, the difference between the group from last night and the group now, is that this group of black-clothed men have a frightening manner about them. They weren't concealing the sharp killing intentions they exuded. Even if these people were still far away, Hushi was able to smell the strong reek of blood their bodies carried. No one was more familiar than Hushi about what those kind of people were like. Those kind of people were without the slightest scruple, becoming joyful at the thought of slaughter. Her complexion changed, and quickly getting up, she ordered Shi Jiao and the others to flee with Wet Nurse Chen and Xiao Li into Kang Mountain. Wet Nurse Chen was reluctant to escape and leave Hushi alone, but she was efficiently knocked out by Hushi, who then threw her to Shi Jiao, properly protect Wet Nurse Chen and Xiao Li. "Without my order, no one is allowed to return." Shi Jiao and the others hesitated as they worriedly looked at Hushi, but their instinct to obey made them grit their teeth and nod. Tears clung to Xiao Li's face, and choking back sobs she said, "Miss, have I brought trouble to you? I'm not leaving, I want to stay with you." Hushi sneered, "Do you want me to knock you out too? No matter who the people are that come, I have a way to deal with them. I don't need you all to worry about it." Pausing, she then continued and said, "Keep watch over our home for me." Chapter 122, Powerless and Right, Our Home. Although it has only been a short time period of little more than a month, she has regarded this courtyard as home, the people in this courtyard as her family. She will not allow her family to meet with mishap. For any person who dares to touch those she cares about, she will definitely let them pay a painful price. Xiao Li's face gradually showed a firm look of dedication, and wiping her tears, she repeatedly nodded her head. Her expression of one making a promise. Shi Jiao, Xiao Li, and the others had just left, when several black-clothed men using flying swords rapidly descended on the empty ground of the small courtyard. They of course saw that weak old woman and child running to hide in Kang Mountain, so one person amongst them who was fiddling with a dagger in his hand sneeringly asked, "Do I need to rush over and get rid of those useless people?" Another person replied with, "Our boss's order was that the patron only wanted Nalan Hush's life, we don't have any business with the rest." Did he think our drought demon organization, full of gold medal assassins, was a vegetable market? That when we receive a mission we also include a service of giving a gift? The two other people burst into loud laughter, their gazes landing on one of the small houses in the courtyard. The person who was previously talking slightly raised an eyebrow as he said, "I really didn't expect that the third miss, the legendary trash of Nalan Manor, would have such courage. Letting her servants leave first and staying behind to throw her life away. TSK, so interesting." Another young voice couldn't help but grumble, "I don't know what our boss was thinking. She's only trash without a cultivation base, that's all, she hasn't even reached the chi refining stage. Is it necessary to use all four of us together to dispose of her? Alright, our boss decided it like this, so naturally he has reason. As long as we obediently obey his orders then that will be enough. Xiao Ba, you go, efficiently bring the young Mrs. Severed Head out here, we'll wait for you. If people knew that we, 4 Grand Meridian stage martial artists, killed an ordinary person together, wouldn't we be a laughingstock?" Xiao Ba, the youngest martial artist, muttered as he obediently pushed the door open and walked to where Hush's room was located. The 3 other assassins remained in the small courtyard, leisurely chatting. They were completely unworried about whether Xiao Ba would be able to kill that girl or not. After all, one is a Meridian stage martial artist, while the other one is an ordinary person without a cultivation base. It was like a human and an ant, if stepped on, the ant would die, so how could be afraid of a powerless ant? Xiao Ba flipped the dagger in his hand, and without even bothering to conceal his figure, he entered the plainly decorated woman's bedroom with loud footsteps. Yet the next moment, Xiao Ba suddenly sensed the coldness of a hidden weapon directly shoot towards him. Not good. Xiao Ba thought gloomily, and moving sideways, he dodged countless hidden weapons that swept over his cheek, but some still directly pierced his body. As the hidden weapons reached his body, Xiao Ba discovered that they were silver needles, as thin as a strand of hair. When these needles touched his body, he found that they contained an icy spiritual power that made him, this Meridian stage martial artist's entire body, grow cold. However, Xiao Ba simply didn't care about these small lousy needles with weak icy spiritual power. With this attack though, it did arouse the bloodlust within his body. "Little girl, if you had just obediently died, I could have made it fast and painless. But since you want to resist, then you can taste my 18 cruel method." Saying so, he gathered all his spiritual power, then rushed towards the girl hidden in the shadows. But soon, Xiao Ba's expression changed to one of alarm. He was shocked to find that his dantian was being sealed by something. So he was unable to move the spiritual power in his body. Chapter 123, Beheaded in One Strike. Xiao Ba opened his mouth to shout, but the little girl that had been hiding in the shadows suddenly disappeared. The next moment, Xiao Ba felt a burst of sharp pain in his throat, and suddenly, blood was spewing from his neck. Opening his eyes wide in disbelief, he stared at the girl almost within reach before he quickly retreated. His eyes were filled with fright, unwillingness, and despair. Soon after he slowly closed his eyes, his breathing ceasing. Beheaded in one strike. Hushi didn't pause, and quickly transferring all the internal power within her body to conceal her figure, she turned around and jumped out the window, escaping towards the depths of Kang Mountain. In fact, Hushi's current strength could in no way compare to a group of assassins, let alone 3. She hadn't even had the confidence that she would win a one-on-one fight. Just a moment ago, if that assassin hadn't been so careless, or if he hadn't tried to use so much spiritual power after being hit by the invisible needles, he would have discovered that it was just a thin layer of internal power sealing his dantian. It wouldn't have been able to withstand even a single blow. Unfortunately, his first mistake was to seriously underestimate Hushi, and then, His second mistake was to lose his composure and become frightened by the invisible needles, becoming so terrified he had lost his ability to think. It was only then that Hashi had found the opportunity to kill him in one hit. In the yard, the remaining 3 assassins were still leisurely chatting, and even though they smelled the strong reek of blood, they didn't have the slightest worry. But as time went by, they started to realize that Xiao Bie was taking a little too long to complete his task, and that there weren't any sounds of movement coming from the room. Puzzled, they walked to the room, and after barely opening the door, all 3 of the assassins' faces changed. They saw that the small room was covered in blood. It even flowed to the door while the stench of it permeated the room. Lying in the middle of a pool of blood was their younger brother, Xiao Bie. His eyes were wide open, his face frightened, and his breathing had long since ceased. The leader looked at his younger brother's corpse and his eyes bulged in anger. Grinding his teeth, he ruthlessly said, "Chase her. We must tear that smelly girl's body to shred." The 3 assassins were extremely fast, so although Hashi had a head start and was using her qinggong, when facing martial artists using flying swords, she was still caught in the blink of an eye. The leader of the assassins halted in mid-air, and looking below at the lightning speed of Hashi, the corner of his mouth raised to reveal the trace of a cruel smile. To an ordinary person's eyes, Hashi's speed is extremely fast, nearly turning her into a shadow, but for 3 Meridian stage experts, this kind of speed is simply not worth mentioning. The leader raised his arm, and condensing his spiritual power into a dark red fireball on his hand, he wrapped it around the flying sword. Then, with one hand holding the sword hilt, he suddenly threw the sword. The fireball engulfed the flying sword in a flash, following it as it hurtled at lightning speed towards the fleeing Hashi. The assassins heard a loud bang and the fireball scattered, turning the flying sword into fine powder. Yet the expected outcome of Hashi being torn apart into hundreds of pieces didn't occur. She instead stumbled 2 steps due to the heat of the explosion, yet without pausing she continued to dash forward, as if she wasn't affected by that attack in the slightest. In mid-air, the 3 assassins' faces showed their shock. One must know that the strike from the lead assassin a moment ago was equal to the strength of 10 people. His cultivation base is currently at the peak of Meridian stage, so even an expert on Gold Core stage would at least suffer a little damage from that strike. Yet how is that an ordinary person was able to walk away, seemingly unharmed? Chapter 124, Piercing the Heart. So thinking about it, there is only one explanation. This girl's body possessed a treasure. Moreover, it must be a rank 5 or higher magical tool. The assassins looked at each other in dismay, greed evident in their expressions as they suddenly accelerated the speed of their flying swords to catch up to Hashi. While Hashi was fleeing, she touched her hair, and when she felt the remnants of a fine powder in her hand, her heart soared. Just a moment ago, it wasn't any sort of treasure that had blocked the assassin's attack, rather, it was the imprint that Nangongyu left on her body. It was only at a time when her life was at risk that the imprint would transform into a protective barrier, keeping her safe from harm. Nangongyu, seems like I already owe him too much. Unfortunately though, it seems that today might be her funeral. She was afraid that perhaps she wouldn't have the opportunity to repay him in the future. This thought had just flashed through Hush's mind, when before her eyes those assassins suddenly surrounded her. The leader's gaze was filled with fake kindness as he looked at her, yet he coldly said, "Nailan Hashi, if you hand over the treasure hidden on your body, I'll make your death less painful. Otherwise, based on the hatred we have for you after you killed Xiao Bie, we will certainly have you begging for death before we're through." Hashi slightly panted, her gaze cold as she studied the 3 people before her without the slightest trace of panic or fear. "Who ordered you to kill me?" Standing on the left side of the leader, one of the assassins' expressions abruptly twisted, and pulling out his long sword he shouted, "Smelly girl, still unwilling to shed tears without seeing a coffin. You even dare to adopt a high attitude with us when it's just you alone. Do you think you're a match for us?" Hush's figure suddenly flashed as she disappeared from where she was originally standing, and with lightning speed due to her internal power, she rushed towards the assassin on the left. The assassin's face slightly changed, and condensing a thunderbolt on his palm, he fiercely threw it towards Hush's chest. A crack could be heard, and Hushi felt a sharp scorching pain, causing all 4 of her limbs to spasm. But she didn't retreat. Instead, she continued forward. After being struck by the thunderbolt, her face showed a strange smile as she rushed towards him. The assassin on the left suddenly uttered an exclamation, and slowly bowed his head. Looking down, he saw a slender dagger accurately stabbed into his abdomen, blood steadily seeping from the wound. Yet the frightening part is that when the blood made contact with the air, it suddenly turned a dark green color that could cause a person's hair to stand on end. Pain, itchy. The assassin dropped his long sword and frantically scratched his body as he rolled around on the ground wailing. In the blink of an eye, his face was now badly mangled and dripping blood. Xiao Wu, what happening to you? The assassin on the right wanted to rush over and help him, but was stopped by the leader, Laro-san. Look clearly. Xiao Wu is highly poisonous right now, you will only suffer too if you go over to him. Saying so, his ruthless gaze fiercely stabbed towards Hushi like a sharp sword. Slut, what have you done to Xiao Wu? The side of Hushi's body was badly mangled and bleeding from being struck by the thunderbolt, and due to the pain, her complexion was deathly pale. Yet upon her mouth was an unscrupulous smile as she said, I placed a poison named tearing heart-splitting lung on the dagger I used. As soon as the poison enters the heart and arteries, the whole body will become unbearably painful and itchy. He only needs to shred his heart to stop the pain. As if confirming Hush's words, that assassin called Xiao Wu all of a sudden released a long mournful hiss, hysterically howling, I can't stand it anymore. Following that, his body suddenly exploded, flesh and blood splattering everywhere. Chapter 125. Unwilling, the leader's forehead twitched as he looked at the flesh and blood that landed on his foot, thinking that there were a few pieces of shredded heart mixed in the gore. The other remaining assassin's eyes were full of alarm and resentment as he looked at Hushi. They didn't expect that although throughout the year they would be the ones attacking, suddenly, they were the ones being attacked. An insignificant ordinary person without a cultivation base had actually dared to mess with them, forcing the 4 expert Meridian stage martial artists into a tight corner. Not just Xiao Ba had lost his life, now Xiao Wu had died miserably too. From this moment on, these 2 drought demon assassins' expressions were grave. They no longer dared to regard Hushi as an ordinary and weak woman. But from the bottom of Hushi's heart a powerless and bitter laugh rose. In fact, her poisons were very difficult to deal with, but a martial artist's defense power is more difficult to deal with. Just recently with Xiao Wu, if she hadn't done the unexpected and risked her life by not avoiding the thunderbolt, then there would have been no way she could have caught him off guard and managed to insert the poisonous dagger into his dantian. If she had missed, the poison would have been unable to penetrate into his body, and his spiritual power would have naturally expelled it. Therefore, that was her last chance to fight back, there wouldn't be a second chance. Sure enough, the next moment the leader's figure abruptly disappeared, and when he reappeared, a long sword that emitted fire spiritual power was in his hand as he fiercely thrust it towards Hushi's body. Hushi felt a burning pain from her chest and abdomen as the long sword pierced her body, causing scarlet blood to pour to the ground. Her body slowly became limp and she started to collapse, her eyes blurry. She could almost sense the vitality draining from her body bit by bit, while the Grim Reaper's sickle edged closer. Was she going to die? Just when she has started her new life, she is destined to quietly die in this wilderness. Unwilling. Really, unwilling. She still hasn't become stronger, her dantian still hasn't awakened, still haven't repaid Nangongyu for helping her. How can she die like this? The lead assassin had a thought, then the long sword that was stabbed into Hushi's body suddenly flew out, returning to his hand. The bloodstains on the long sword had evaporated due to the fire, however, Hushi's body was now completely limp, and she toppled to her knees onto the pool of blood at her feet. Until this moment, the 2 assassins hadn't been able to relax, and the assassin on the left released a sigh. She was really just an ordinary person, so she didn't have any ability to resist Big Brother's sword. Unfortunately, Xiao Wu and Xiao Ba fell to her tricks. The lead assassin that was called Big Brother walked forward, and towering above the dying Hushi, he looked at her with an arrogant expression, his eyes full of hatred. Then, with a stern voice he said, I said before, that since you dared to kill my younger brother, that I would certainly tear your body to shreds, leaving you to die without a burial place. So slut, go die. Holding the long sword covered in flames up high, he suddenly brought it down, aiming towards Hushi. The assassin on the left excitedly retreated 2 steps, shouting loudly, "Chop off her forelimbs first, cut this swine apart. I would like to see what tricks she can play then." Seeing the long sword heading towards her, and knowing that she had no hope of survival this time, Hushi desperately closed her eyes and gently pinched the throat-sealing blood poison in her hand. Rather than meeting her demise by assassins, she would rather end her own life. However, just when Hushi was about to swallow the poison, an overwhelming amount of spiritual pressure abruptly fell from the sky. Hushi's body that was almost touched by the long sword was now like a kite with its string snapped. After swaying side to side, she then fell to the ground with a crash. The assassins who just a moment ago were shouting in excitement, now felt the blood in their veins freeze. Due to the extreme fear of a strong martial artist, their whole bodies shivered, and with a pop, they landed on the ground in kneeling positions. Chapter 126, Drought Demon Organization. Hushi A frightened and angry roar sounded at her ears, the voice so familiar yet so distant. Hushi was only half conscious, and as her body grew colder, she could feel that someone was holding her in their arms, gently removing the skin mask on her face. This person was slightly trembling as they embraced her in what felt like fear and regret, but so warm, so comforting. The corner of Hushi's mouth raised into a faint, gentle smile, before she then lost consciousness. Nangong Yu hugged Hushi tightly. Examining her heavily injured body, he didn't dare believe his own eyes. The girl's features under the mask were still delicate and beautiful, but her complexion was deathly pale, nearly transparent. Her phoenix eyes that always captivated him were now dull, devoid of light, as if at any time she would disappear from this world. A few days ago he was listening to Baihu's report, eating her specially prepared foods, and imagining her proud and playful appearance. He has always been looking forward to the day he would be able to meet with her. The day he would be able to lift the seal on her dantian, letting her depend on him more so that they would be inseparable. However, when he awoke this morning, what was waiting for him? It was to an alert from the imprint he left on Hushi's body, letting him know that she was being attacked. After he hurriedly rushed over, what he found is her dying. Nangong Yu's hands clenched tightly into fists, the light in his eyes scarlet flames that burned fiercely. At this moment, he was strongly trying to suppress a heaven-destroying, earth-extinguishing fury. He wanted to dismember the people who injured Hushi, crushing their bones to dust. You'll be fine. Nangong Yu gripped Hushi's hand, quickly transferring the pure essence of his spiritual power to her. "You have me here, I definitely won't let something happen to you." The transferring of spiritual power to Hushi helped her weak breathing slowly become stable, while the fatal wound in her chest and abdomen indicated some signs of healing. Once he was sure that Hushi's life wasn't in immediate danger, it was only then that Nangong Yu raised his head, his scarlet eyes burning as he glared at the 2 assassins not far away. His icy voice contained a promise of deadly violence as he spoke. "Drought Demon Organization, very good. In this world, there have been very few people who have been able to provoke me to anger, and yet you've managed it. Hell King. You are, Your Highness Hell King." The leader saw the Hell King's evil demon-like smile, and suddenly his eyes opened wide as he released a horrified shout. "Isn't this the one who was called the #1 genius in Jinling Kingdom countless times the past few years?" And when he reached Gold Core stage, the 9th heaven's black thunder fell. "That His Highness Hell King? The one who even the royal family of Jinling Kingdom are afraid of, with his strength massacring countless troops from magical beasts, dyeing the Gui Jin mountain range red, that His Highness Hell King? That one who was bestowed the name King of the Underworld, ruling over the life and death of the human world, controlling the 6 paths of reincarnation, completely ruthless when killing his enemies, that His Highness Hell King?" The assassins sat blankly on the ground. Under Nangong Yu's fierce gaze, their bodies began to tremble all over. Heavens! In the end, what sort of mission had the Drought Demon Organization received? This clearly unremarkable girl, without any good looks, how could the Hell King have taken a fancy to her? No one who provoked the Hell King had been able to survive intact. This is the day the assassins from Drought Demon Organization would be annihilated. Mercy. Hell King, please spare us. The cultivation base of the leader was too low, so he couldn't help but feel fear in his heart, and crawling to Nangong Yu's feet, he said in a trembling voice, "We only received a mission, and we accepted money from that person, so on behalf of that person we were to kill her. We didn't really want to intentionally dispose of Miss Naylan. Please Hell King, spare us assassins from Drought Demon Organization." You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.